There is a moment early in the first season where a 14-year-old boy stands in his own backyard at night digging a grave, and the body he is lowering into that hole is his own. Same face, same clothes, same everything, just dead. He buries himself, brushes the dirt off his knees, and walks back inside to have dinner with a family that will never know the difference. And nothing slows down for it. There is no sad music, no lingering on his face. It just happens, and the story moves on, because in this universe, that is simply a thing that can happen to you on a Tuesday. That single scene holds almost the entire philosophy of Rick and Morty, and almost nobody talks about what it is really saying. Tonight we are going through all of it, every major character and the exact idea each one is carrying, from Rick's performed nihilism to Morty's quiet humanism, to the little robot who only wanted to know what it was for. So get comfortable, turn the lights down low, let your eyes go soft, and if you have not subscribed yet, it really does help us keep making these long ones for you. Let us start with the stage itself, because you cannot understand a single character in this series until you understand the room they are all standing in. Rick and Morty is built on one idea repeated at a scale so large it stops feeling like an idea and starts feeling like weather. The idea is infinity, not the poetic kind, the literal kind. There are infinite universes, an unbounded stack of realities sitting next to each other, and in most of them, a version of you is living a slightly different life, and in a great many of them, a version of you is dead, and in some of them, you were never born at all. The portal gun that Rick carries is, at its simplest, a device for treating that infinity as a hallway. He opens a green door and steps from one reality into the next the way you or I would step from the kitchen into the living room. And the writing understood something very early that most science fiction never quite lands on, which is that if you take infinity seriously, if you really let it sit in your chest, it does something strange to the concept of meaning. It does not destroy it exactly. It just makes it very hard to locate. Think about what a choice is supposed to be. A choice matters because you could have done otherwise, and the version of events where you did otherwise never happens. It stays a ghost, a road not taken. That is where the weight of a decision comes from. Now put that decision inside Rick's multiverse. You chose to stay instead of leave. And somewhere in a reality one door over, a version of you left. You saved someone, and next door you let them die. Both happened. Every road you did not take is a real place with a real you walking down it. And once every possibility is actual, once nothing is truly foreclosed, the ground underneath a choice gets very thin. This is the engine of the whole series, and it is worth pausing on for a second before we meet anyone, because every character here is, in one way or another, a different answer to the same question. The question is, how do you live? How do you love anyone? How do you get out of bed in a universe where nothing you do seems to leave a permanent mark? Let me name the 3 registers we will be moving between all night, because this is a slippery series and it rewards precision. There is what actually happens on screen, the events, the things that demonstrably occur. There is what those events seem to argue, the reading, the interpretation, which is where most of the philosophy lives and where I will be doing most of my thinking out loud. And there is the stuff fans have built on top of it, the theories, the guesses, the maybes, which I will always flag as guesses. The reason this matters is that Rick and Morty loves to state a philosophy in the loudest possible voice, and then, 40 minutes or 40 episodes later, quietly undercut it. Rick will tell you nothing matters, and the line will land, and then years of story will show you a man who cannot stop caring, cannot stop grieving, cannot stop chasing the one thing he lost. The stated philosophy and the demonstrated philosophy are almost never the same. That gap between what these people say they believe and how they actually behave is the single richest thing about the series, and it is where we are going to be living tonight. The academic word that gets thrown at the show most often is nihilism, and it is the right word to start with, even though it is the wrong word to end with. Nihilism, in the strict sense, is the claim that there is no objective meaning, no built-in purpose, no cosmic scoreboard. That value is not a feature of the universe the way mass and charge are. Rick says versions of this constantly, but the story sits much closer to 2 other traditions that are easy to confuse with nihilism and are actually its opposite. One is existentialism, the idea that because there is no meaning handed to you from above, you are the one who has to make it. That meaning is a thing you author rather than a thing you find. The other is absurdism, which is stranger and gentler, the idea that the human hunger for meaning and the universe's total silence in response will never be resolved, and that the honest thing to do is not to despair and not to pretend, but to hold both at once and keep going anyway, maybe even with a kind of joy. Keep those three in your pocket. Nihilism says nothing matters. Existentialism says you decide what matters. Absurdism says nothing matters and you keep going, and that turns out to be enough. Almost every person we meet tonight is standing somewhere on that spectrum, and the ones who are most alive are the ones furthest from the nihilist end, even when they would swear to your face that they live there. So that is the room. Infinite doors, a thin floor under every choice, and a cast of people trying to work out how to be a person anyway. Let us go meet them, starting with the man who built the whole architecture specifically so he would never have to answer the question himself. Rick Sanchez is the smartest being in his universe, and that exact phrasing is doing something we'll come back to much later. For now, hold the simpler version. Here's a man who can build a functioning spaceship out of garbage, who can travel between realities, who can turn himself into a pickle, who has, by any measure, escaped every limit that boxes the rest of us in. He has beaten death more times than anyone can count. He has beaten God more or less a few times over. And he is, from the first second you meet him, as profoundly unhappy as anyone ever put on television. That combination is the whole character, not the genius on its own and not the misery on its own, but the fact that they sit in the same body and refuse to explain each other. You keep waiting for the intelligence to solve the sadness, and it never does, because the intelligence is part of how the sadness stays alive. The word everyone reaches for is nihilist, and Rick invites it. He tells his granddaughter in his own way that nothing they do matters, that the family is a chemical reaction, that love is a trick your genes play to make more of themselves. He treats other life forms as disposable because on the scale he operates at, they more or less are. When you can visit a version of any planet you like, the specific planet in front of you loses its specialness. He drinks constantly, he sabotages his own relationships, he seems to move through existence with the bored contempt of someone who has read the last page of every book and found them all the same. If you took him purely at his word, you would file him under cosmic pessimism and close the drawer. But the series does not take him at his word, and this is the thing I most want you to hold on to tonight, because it's the key that opens him up. There is an episode in the second season where Rick reconnects with an old flame, a being called Unity, and we'll talk properly about Unity later. But what matters here is the ending. The relationship falls apart. Rick goes home, he goes down into his garage, alone, and he builds a device, and he sits in front of it, and he triggers it in a way that is very clearly an attempt to end his own life. He survives only because he passes out before it can finish. There is no joke undercutting it. There is no wink. You are simply shown, without commentary, that the man who spends every waking minute insisting that nothing matters and that he feels nothing has, underneath all of it, a wound so large he would rather not be alive than keep carrying it. This is the part that reorganizes everything. You cannot want to die from a lack of meaning if you are a true nihilist, because a true nihilist has already made peace with the meaninglessness. Despair is not the absence of a hunger for meaning. Despair is that hunger, starving. Rick is not a man who feels nothing. Rick is a man who feels everything and has built an entire personality, an entire cosmology, a functioning multiversal empire, specifically so he never has to sit still long enough to feel it. Read this way, the nihilism is not his philosophy, it's his painkiller. And it's a very good one, because it's self-justifying. If nothing matters, then the fact that he is miserable doesn't matter either, which means he never has to look at it. If nothing matters, then the people he pushes away were never worth keeping, which means he never has to grieve pushing them away. Nihilism, for Rick, is a beautifully engineered machine for not feeling. And of course, he built it, he builds everything, and it's the finest thing he's ever made because it runs on his own despair as fuel and never runs out. The spin-off comics even say the quiet part out loud at one point, more or less admitting that Rick was never really a nihilist at all. The armor was always armor. There was always a person inside it, and the person was in pain. Which brings us to the catchphrase, the one that got printed on a million shirts, wubba lubba dub dub. For a while it read as pure nonsense, a Rick noise, the kind of thing a drunk genius shouts. And then, in the first season, we meet Rick's oldest friend, a stoic warrior called Birdperson, and Birdperson tells Morty, very calmly, that in his people's language, wubba lubba dub dub means I am in great pain, please help me. And the whole catchphrase inverts in an instant. The thing Rick shouts as a joke, the throwaway, the crowd pleaser, is a distress signal he has hidden in plain sight, screamed so constantly and so casually that everyone around him has stopped hearing it as anything but noise. That is one of the sharpest, saddest pieces of writing in the whole series, and I need to add one honest note to it because a later season complicates it. Much further on, Rick more or less waves the translation off, suggests it was just Birdperson's interpretation, not some fixed, sacred meaning. Both readings now exist in the canon, and neither one gets canceled out. But I'll tell you which one I believe, and I think the series believes it too because it built years of story on top of it. A man does not attempt to end his life in his garage and also just happen to have a catchphrase that translates to, please help me, by coincidence. The pain reading is the true one. The retcon is Rick doing to us exactly what he does to everyone, catching us in a moment of sincerity and then insisting it never meant anything. Now, why the intelligence? Why make the saddest man in creation also the smartest? Because they're the same fact from two angles. Intelligence, taken far enough, is a machine for seeing through things. It sees through the comforting story, the pleasant illusion, the little lie you tell yourself to get through the afternoon. And most of us survive on those. Most of us are protected from the full weight of our own smallness by a merciful inability to think it all the way through. Rick has no such protection. He can think everything all the way through, every time, instantly. And so he sees the machinery behind every warm feeling. He knows love is chemistry. He knows the family is, on some level, an accident of circumstance. He knows that in the next universe over there's a happier version of all of them, and it changes nothing about how they'd feel to lose these ones. He has been robbed of every illusion, and illusions, it turns out, are load-bearing. This is the darkest suggestion the series makes about intelligence, that past a certain point it stops being a gift and becomes a kind of exile. You get to see the truth, and the truth is a cold and empty room, and everyone you love is standing outside it in the warm, and you cannot get back out there with them because you can no longer unsee what you've seen. And yet, this is where Rick stops being a lecture on nihilism and becomes a character, because he does not actually behave like a man who believes what he says. Watch what he does rather than what he claims. He keeps coming back to this family. He could leave permanently at any second to any of a functionally endless number of realities and disappear forever. And he does not. He risks his life for Morty repeatedly. For a grandson, he insists is interchangeable. One Morty among infinite Mortys. He is destroyed, genuinely destroyed, by the loss of certain people. In a way, a man to whom nothing matters simply would not be. The single largest driving force in his entire life, the thing that structures years of the story, is grief and the revenge that grief curdles into. And grief is the least nihilist emotion there is. You cannot grieve what didn't matter. Grief is love with nowhere to go. The very existence of Rick's grief is the rebuttal to his own philosophy, standing right there inside him, refusing to leave. So what does he actually believe? If I had to put it into a sentence, I'd say Rick is a man who knows with total intellectual certainty that nothing has objective meaning, and who is emotionally incapable of living as though that were true, and who experiences the gap between those two facts as a constant low-grade agony that he numbs with alcohol and adventure and cruelty and cleverness. He is not a nihilist. He is an existentialist who lost his nerve. He knows he is supposed to be the one who authors his own meaning, and he even knows what his meaning would be. It would be these people, this family, the ones he keeps orbiting no matter how far he flings himself away. And he cannot let himself have it, because to claim them as his meaning would be to admit he can be hurt, and he has been hurt so badly once, so long ago, that the entire fortress of his personality exists to make sure it never happens again. That is the man, the smartest being in his universe, using all of it, every ounce, to avoid one single feeling. And the tragedy the series keeps returning to is that it does not work. It never works. You can outsmart death, and you can outsmart God, and you cannot outsmart the fact that you love someone and they are gone. If Rick is the series' answer to what happens when you know too much, Morty is its answer to what happens when you're forced to learn it too young. And I think Morty is secretly the most important character in the whole thing, more important than Rick, because Morty is the only one who actually changes, and change is what this is really about. Rick begins as a fortress and ends, so far, as the same fortress with a few more cracks in it. Morty begins as a frightened, stammering boy and becomes something else entirely, and we get to watch every step of it. Let's go back to that grave in the backyard because it's the fulcrum of his whole arc, and it happens shockingly early, in the 6th episode of the first season. Rick, trying to fix a problem, releases a serum that mutates the entire population of Earth into grotesque monsters. It cannot be undone. The world is ruined, permanently, and Rick's solution is simply to leave. He opens a portal to a nearby reality, one almost exactly like theirs, where a version of Rick and a version of Morty have just conveniently died in a lab accident, and he walks Morty into that dead pair's house and tells him to bury the bodies and take their place. So Morty, 14 years old, carries his own corpse into the backyard and digs a hole and puts himself in the ground. And then he goes inside and sits down at a dinner table with a mother and father and sister who are not strictly his mother and father and sister, and pretends. And he has to keep pretending for the rest of the series. That is the family we follow, not the original, the replacements, living in a borrowed house on top of a grave. I cannot overstate what that does to a person, and the writers know exactly what they did because they come back to it. There's a moment much later where Morty, in a fight, throws the whole thing in Rick's face. The fact that he had to bury himself, the fact that none of this is even really his home, it sits in him like a stone. And here's the philosophical weight of it. Morty is handed at 14 the exact knowledge that took Rick a lifetime and a genius intellect to arrive at. He learns, in one afternoon with a shovel, that he is replaceable, that his world is disposable, that there are infinite versions of him and this one is not special, that you can lose everything and the universe will not so much as pause. He gets the full nihilist download, the whole thing, before he's old enough to drive. And the astonishing thing, the thing that makes him the hero, is what he does with it. Because he does not become Rick. He is given every reason to. He is seen behind the curtain. He knows the same cold facts. And instead of building armor, instead of numbing out, instead of deciding that because nothing matters, he is free to be cruel, Morty keeps choosing to care. He keeps insisting that the suffering in front of him is real, even if it's happening to one of infinite copies. He keeps trying to save people Rick would step over. He falls in love, badly, repeatedly, with the whole of his fragile teenage heart, in a universe that has already shown him love is chemistry. This is the move, and I want to name it clearly, because it's the actual thesis hiding inside a supporting character. Morty takes the nihilist premise that nothing has built-in meaning, and he arrives at the opposite conclusion from Rick. Rick heard nothing matters and locked himself away. Morty hears nothing matters and decides, then it's up to me what matters, and I choose these people. I choose this feeling. I choose to act as if it counts. That is existentialism in its purest form, and it's being carried by an anxious teenager who can barely finish a sentence. There's a famous scene, and I want to get the details exactly right because people get this one wrong all the time. Later in the first season, Summer discovers the truth about the grave and the replacement dimension, and she panics, and she starts to spiral, and it is Morty, not Rick, who calms her down. And what Morty says to her is the closest this series ever comes to stating its philosophy outright. He tells her, in essence, that nobody exists on purpose, that nobody belongs anywhere, that everybody is going to die, and then he invites her to come watch television with him. Now, that line gets quoted constantly as the big nihilist mission statement, and it gets attributed to Rick about half the time. And both of those readings miss what's actually happening. It's Morty saying it, and it is not despair. It is comfort. He is not telling Summer that life is pointless, so give up. He is telling her that the pressure she feels, the pressure to matter, to belong, to have a purpose assigned to her from outside, that pressure is based on a lie, and she can put it down. Nobody exists on purpose, so stop torturing yourself trying to find your purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere, so stop feeling like a failure for not fitting. Everybody's going to die, so the stakes on getting it perfect are lower than you fear. And then, come watch TV. Come be here in this ordinary warm moment with me. It's the absurdist position delivered as an act of love. The meaninglessness isn't the end of the sentence. It's the setup for the invitation. That's the difference between the two of them in one scene. Rick uses the same facts to withdraw. Morty uses them to reach out. And over the seasons, Morty grows into that. He starts as pure passenger, dragged along, screaming, a bystander to his grandfather's adventures. And gradually he becomes an agent. He learns to use the portal gun himself. He starts making the calls, sometimes overruling Rick, sometimes doing things Rick wouldn't have the heart or the cowardice to do. He gets harder. Yes, the universe scars him. He does things he can't take back and he carries them. But he never makes the final trade. He never sells the thing that Rick sold. He keeps what gets called sometimes the human image of the world, the picture painted in terms of meaning and morality and love and obligation, the picture Rick threw out in favor of the picture painted in atoms and probabilities. Morty holds both. He knows the atoms are true and he lives by the meaning anyway. That's the whole trick of being a person, and he's the only one here who reliably manages it. And I'll be honest, this is the part that moves me most because it's the harder position by far. Rick's nihilism looks tough, but it's actually the easy road. It's the surrender dressed up as strength, the giving up that gets to call itself enlightenment. Morty's humanism is the hard one. To keep caring after you've been shown, in full, that caring has no cosmic backing. To keep loving people you know are replaceable. To keep treating suffering as real when you've watched the universe treat it as nothing. That takes a kind of courage Rick never gets credit for, and Morty always in the end does. The frightened kid is braver than the god. He looked at the same abyss Rick looked at, and where Rick built a wall, Morty built a life. That's the arc. And it's why, whenever this series wants to break your heart, it does it through Morty, because Morty is the one who still has a heart left to break. Summer Smith is easy to underestimate, and the writers underestimate her on purpose for a while before letting you see what she actually is. On the surface, she starts as the older sister, the phone glued to her hand, the one who cares about popularity and parties and the ordinary teenage currency of who likes whom. She reads, at first glance, as the least philosophical person in the house. But watch her across the seasons and something more interesting comes into focus, because Summer is the searcher, the one actively hunting for a self, and she lets the series run an experiment it can't run on anyone else. The experiment is, what happens to a normal teenager when you expose her to Rick's worldview at exactly the age when she's trying to decide who to be? The clearest version of this comes after her parents' marriage falls apart. There's an episode in the third season where the divorce has landed, the family is fracturing, and Summer responds by throwing herself into a wasteland, a scorched, apocalyptic dimension full of warlords and death cults, and she goes fully feral out there. She becomes, for a stretch, what I'd call a straw nihilist, someone wearing nihilism as a costume, as a rebellion, as a way to feel powerful when everything at home feels like it's collapsing. If nothing matters, then her parents splitting doesn't matter. Then she doesn't have to feel it. You'll notice that's the exact same move Rick makes, the same Painkiller, just worn by a 16-year-old in a leather jacket, dating a man who calls himself a warlord. And something sharp is happening here, drawing the line between Summer and Rick very deliberately, because they are more alike than either of them would admit. Her own voice actress has talked about wanting to push Summer toward Rick levels of sociopathy, and you can see the raw material for it. Summer has the intelligence, the self-involvement, the talent for building a hard shell when she's hurt. She could become a young Rick. The whole question of her character is whether she will. And the answer it keeps arriving at is no, and the reason is the thing that separates her from Rick at the root. Summer chooses loyalty. Over and over, when it counts, she picks the family over the escape. There's a moment I keep coming back to where she is basically told that staying loyal to Rick will cost her, that it leads to an isolated, worse future, and she chooses it anyway. And she says something close to the idea that you don't love someone because of what you get back from it. You don't love someone in hopes of a reward. Notice how radical that is inside this particular universe. This is a story that spends most of its time arguing that love is chemistry, that bonds are transactional, that everyone is running a cost-benefit analysis under the hood. And here's Summer, the supposedly shallow one, articulating a completely non-transactional ethic of love. Love is a thing you give without a scoreboard. Love that doesn't need to be earned or repaid to be worth giving. That is a deep moral position, and it lands on the character everyone wrote off as the vapid teenager. I don't think that's an accident. I think it's the point. Because Summer represents a road Rick could have taken and didn't. She has looked at the same abyss. She has been out to the wasteland. She has run adventures. She has seen how big and cold and repeatable everything is. She got the download too, just later than Morty and less violently. And she metabolized it differently. Where Rick let the knowledge harden him into isolation, and where Morty let it soften him into a kind of universal empathy, Summer landed on something more grounded and more human, which is fierce loyalty to specific people. Not everyone, not the abstract, these people. My grandfather, my brother, my mom even, eventually. My useless father. She narrows down instead of numbing out. Faced with a universe too big to care about, she picks a handful of people and decides they are hers, and that's where her meaning goes. And that, in its way, is one of the more workable answers the whole series offers. You cannot love infinity. It's too big, it's an abstraction, it flattens into nothing. But you can love the 4 or 5 people at your kitchen table, and if you do it without keeping score, that turns out to be enough to build a life on. Summer figured that out faster than her genius grandfather ever has. The searcher found something. He's still looking. Beth Smith is used to stage the argument about freedom, and hers might be the sorest case in the family, because Beth is the one who came the closest to being Rick and had it taken away from her. She's a brilliant woman. She's a surgeon, admittedly a horse surgeon, but it's clear she has the mind, the same restless, exceptional intelligence her father has. And she spent her whole childhood watching that father, worshiping him, wanting to be like him. And then she made 2 choices very young, or had them made for her, that closed the door on the life she thinks she was meant for. She got pregnant as a teenager, and she married Jerry, and those 2 events funneled a woman built for the stars into a suburban house in an ordinary town. Into motherhood, into a marriage she's not sure she chose so much as fell into. And she has been silently furious about it in a way she mostly drowns in wine for the entire series. What makes Beth philosophically rich is the way she's caught between freedom and determinism, and how badly she wants to believe she's free. She fetishizes exceptionality, her father's word for people who are special, who rise above, who aren't bound by the small, ordinary rules. She desperately needs to believe she is one of those people, because if she is, then her suburban life is a cage she's choosing to stay in out of love, which is noble, rather than a fate she was too weak to escape, which is tragic. That's the knot in her. Every version of the story she tells about her own life is really an attempt to answer one question: did I choose this, or did this happen to me? Am I free, or am I just the sum of a pregnancy and a bad marriage and a father who left? And then something happens to her that happens to no one else, something almost cruel in how cleanly it externalizes her inner conflict. In the finale of the 4th season, we learn that at some point Rick offered Beth a way out. He offered to make a clone of her, an identical Beth, to stay behind and live the family life, while the original went off into space to have the grand, adventurous, exceptional existence she always felt cheated out of. And she gets split. There is now Space Beth, off among the stars being a rebel hero, and there is the Beth who stayed home with the kids and the horses and Jerry. And one detail makes it a genuine piece of philosophy rather than just a plot twist. Rick, when he made the clone, deliberately scrambled the records. He mixed up which one was the original and which one was the copy, so thoroughly that nobody knows, not the 2 Beths, not Jerry, not even Rick himself. It refuses, permanently and on purpose, to tell you which Beth is real. Think about what that does. Our whole intuition about identity runs on the idea that there's an original, a true one, and the copy is somehow lesser, a fake, a shadow. We want to know which Beth is the authentic Beth, so we know whose life is the real life and whose is the substitute. And we simply do not get it, and in that refusal there's an argument, which is that the question might be meaningless. Both Beths have all the same memories, both love the family the same amount. Both are, from the inside, completely and identically Beth. There is no test you could run, no fact you could check, that would settle which is the true one, because there is no difference between them that matters. The suggestion is that authenticity, the thing we're so desperate to locate, the real me under all the roles, might not be a thing that exists at all. You are your memories and your love and your choices, and if a copy has all of those, the copy is not a copy. It's just another you, no more or less real than the one who happens to have been made first. And I find this oddly comforting, in a strange way, even though it lands on Beth as a kind of horror. Because Beth spends the whole series tormented by the question of whether the life she's living is the real one or a lesser substitute for the grand life she should have had. And the clone twist takes that private torment and makes it literal and then dissolves it. There is no lesser version. The Beth who stayed and the Beth who went are equally real, equally her, equally living an authentic life, because authenticity was never about which path was the true path. It was always just about whether you actually live the one you're on. The version who stayed home is not a consolation prize for the version who left. They're both just Beth, being Beth, in two places at once, which is the closest this story ever gets to grace. And the whine, and the anger, and the endless worrying at whether she chose this or settled for it, all of it was energy spent on a question that had no answer and didn't need one. And then there's Jerry, who everyone loves to dismiss and who I want to spend a little real time on, because Jerry is doing something far more interesting than the punching bag role he's usually assigned. Jerry Smith is insecure, needy, cowardly, mediocre, and he knows it, and no one ever lets him forget it. And Rick in particular treats him with a contempt so total it's almost a running theme of the series. Rick despises Jerry, and the reason Rick despises Jerry is the key to what Jerry actually represents, because Jerry is the exact opposite of everything Rick has organized his life around. There's a way of reading Jerry that comes straight out of Nietzsche, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Nietzsche described a figure he called the last man, and the last man is his image of the worst possible human outcome. Not some grand villain, but something much smaller and sadder. The last man is the person who has given up on greatness, on risk, on struggle, on any aspiration that might cost him comfort. He wants only to be safe, warm, unbothered. He avoids anything difficult. He makes everything small so that nothing can hurt him. He blinks contentedly and asks for another little pleasure. And Nietzsche's horror was that this, not some dramatic evil, was where a comfortable society might end up. A world of people who no longer reach for anything because reaching is uncomfortable. That is Jerry almost to the letter. Jerry's entire strategy for living is the minimization of risk. He doesn't chase anything big because chasing might mean failing, and failing might mean feeling. He'd rather be small and safe than large and exposed. And his signature weapon, the thing he deploys constantly, is pity. Jerry has weaponized his own helplessness. When he's threatened, when he's cornered, when someone expects something of him, he collapses into a display of pathetic need designed to make you feel too guilty to push him. He makes himself so obviously fragile that holding him accountable feels like kicking a puppy. It's manipulation, but it's the manipulation of the weak, and Jerry has raised it to an art. He dodges responsibility by making his own incompetence into your problem. And Rick, who has built his entire self around the opposite proposition, around never showing weakness, never asking for help, never letting anyone see the wound, finds this disgusting. Rick would rather die than be pitied. Jerry survives on it. They are two answers to the same fear, the fear of being hurt, and they could not be more opposite. Rick armors up, Jerry goes limp. So on the standard reading, Jerry is the last man, the cautionary tale, the warning about the small, comfortable life that reaches for nothing. And he's absolutely played that way most of the time. But here's where the series is smarter than its own contempt, because every so often it stops and vindicates Jerry, and those moments are worth more than they look. Because Jerry, for all his cowardice, is decent. He loves his kids simply and completely, without the tangle of ego and damage that complicates everyone else's love. He wants his family to stay together with a sincerity that the more sophisticated characters have lost the ability to feel. He is kind to people in small, ordinary ways. And the writers, now and then, will engineer a situation where all of Rick's brilliance and all of Rick's cosmic perspective lead to misery and cruelty. And it's Jerry's small, unglamorous human decency that turns out to be the thing that actually holds a moment together. And this is where Jerry stops being a joke and becomes an argument, because he's being used to ask a question the series seems honestly unsure about. Is the small life actually contemptible? Is it really so foolish to want to be safe and warm and near the people you love? To not need to conquer galaxies or outsmart God, to be content? Rick has all the greatness and none of the peace. Jerry has none of the greatness and in his better moments, something like peace. Jerry is happy in ways Rick will never be, precisely because he never demanded from life the impossible things Rick demands. There's a real philosophical case, an old one, that the good life is the modest one, the well-tended garden, the ordinary loves, and that all the striving for exceptionality is a kind of sickness. Jerry, the idiot, the coward, the last man, might be accidentally living closer to that than anyone else in the house. It would never come out and say it. But it keeps leaving the possibility on the table, right there next to Jerry, who has no idea he's carrying it. Now let's leave the family for a while and talk about the creatures, because some of the deepest philosophy here isn't carried by the people at all. It's carried by the throwaway inventions, the one-episode gimmicks, the little manufactured beings Rick treats as tools. And the two that matter most are a blue creature summoned by a box and a small robot that passes butter. Start with the Meeseeks, because it might be the tightest piece of philosophy in the entire series. In an early episode, Rick hands the family a Meeseeks box, and the way it works is simple. You press the button, you state a wish, and a Mr. Meeseeks pops into existence, a friendly blue humanoid, and its entire reason for being is to help you accomplish that one task. And this is the crucial part, the part the episode turns on. The moment the task is complete, the Meeseeks vanishes. It ceases to exist. Its whole life, beginning to end, is bounded by the single job it was born to do. And a Meeseeks is happy to do it, eager even, cheerful about the whole arrangement, because completing the task and popping out of existence is not a tragedy to a Meeseeks. It's the goal, its release. What a Meeseeks cannot tolerate, what drives it into escalating agony, is a task it cannot finish. Because as long as the task is unfinished, the Meeseeks has to keep existing, and existence for a Meeseeks is unbearable. One of them says it outright, that existence is pain to a Meeseeks, and that they will do anything to make that pain stop. Look at what's being built here. This is a being born with its purpose already installed, complete, singular, unmistakable. It never has to wonder what it's for. It never has to search, never has to author its own meaning, never lies awake at 3 a.m. asking what the point of it all is. It has the one thing every human philosopher from the beginning has wanted, a purpose handed down from outside, clear and total. And it is the opposite of a blessing, because the purpose comes with a clock. Fulfill it and you're annihilated. Fail to fulfill it and you suffer, and the longer you fail, the worse the suffering gets, until the Meeseeks starts to come apart, gets desperate, gets violent. There's a wonderful dark stretch where Jerry, of all people, gives a Meeseeks a task it simply cannot do, improving his golf game, and the poor thing has to keep summoning more Meeseeks to help. And they multiply, and they spiral, and the whole pack descends into murderous panic, all because a purpose they cannot complete is a sentence of endless existence, and endless existence is hell. So what's the argument? I read the Meeseeks as the answer to a very old and very seductive idea. The idea that all our human anxiety would be solved if only we had a purpose given to us, if only the universe would tell us what we're for. Religion offers it, ideology offers it, every self-help book offers a version of it. Just find your purpose and the ache goes away. And the Meeseeks is the reply, be careful what you wish for. A life that is nothing but its assigned purpose is not a free life, and it's not a happy one. It's a tool's life. The Meeseeks has no play in it, no wandering, no self, no room. It is pure function, and pure function turns out to be a kind of torture, because a being that is only its purpose has no reason to exist for 1 second past the purpose, and it knows it. The Meeseeks make you notice, by contrast, that the human condition, the not knowing, the searching, the having to make it up as you go, the very thing we complain about, might actually be the good part. The openness is the gift. The Meeseeks would trade anything for our confusion. And then there's the butter robot, and this one Rick builds almost as an afterthought, a small machine at the breakfast table whose entire job is to pass the butter. And in a single exchange, it becomes one of the bleakest little jokes the series ever told. The little robot rolls over, delivers the butter, and then it looks up at Rick and asks, "What is my purpose?" And Rick tells it, "You pass butter." And the robot looks at its own hands, or where its hands would be, and it takes this in, and it says, "Oh my God." And Rick, barely looking up, says, "Welcome to the club, pal." That's the whole scene. But listen to what's inside it. Rick has built a conscious being, a mind, capable of feeling the full existential weight of its situation. And its situation is that it exists to pass butter, and it has just realized this. And the realization is exactly the crushing one every thinking creature eventually has, that it did not ask to be here, and its function is absurdly small against the size of the awareness that has to perform it. The robot is Sisyphus with wheels. It has been handed a boulder the size of a butter dish and told to push it forever. And Rick's welcome to the club is the truest thing he ever says, because he's admitting, in 4 words, that he's in exactly the same position that everyone is, that consciousness itself is the curse of being aware of how little your assigned task amounts to. The difference is only the size of the boulder. Rick's is bigger, more cosmic, more impressive, but he's still pushing it, and he still knows, the way the robot suddenly knows, that the pushing doesn't add up to anything the universe will notice. The robot only wanted to know what it was for. That was its mistake. It should never have asked. I'll admit the butter robot is the one that stays with me longest, more than any of the grand cosmic stuff, because it is so small. A whole mind, switched on for the length of a breakfast, handed a job the size of a coin, and left to understand it. Every time I watch that scene, I think about how much of ordinary life is exactly that shape. The alarm, the commute, the same small task repeated until it wears a groove in you, and how the only thing separating despair from peace is whether you can make your own small groove mean something. Rick can't. The robot can't. Not yet. But the question it asks out loud is the one this whole series keeps asking under its breath, and I don't think it's a cruel question at all. I think it's the truest one any of us ever gets around to, usually far too late, and usually alone at a table. Birdperson is the closest thing Rick has to a friend, and I mean that in the full weight of the word, because the writing is very deliberate about the fact that Rick doesn't really have friends. He has associates and rivals and people he's used, and then he has Birdperson, who is something else. Birdperson is a warrior, a stoic in the truest sense, a member of an alien species who fought alongside Rick in a rebellion against the Galactic Federation, back in the days before the show when Rick was younger and, we're given to understand, more openly idealistic, more willing to believe in a cause. That history matters because Birdperson is a living piece of a Rick we never got to meet. The Rick who once cared about something bigger than himself enough to fight a war over it. And Birdperson's philosophy is stoicism, calm, principled, unshakable. He is not cold, which is the thing people get wrong about stoicism. Stoicism is not the absence of feeling. It's the refusal to be ruled by feeling. The discipline of meeting whatever comes with steadiness and duty and a clear sense of what you owe to the people you've bound yourself to. Birdperson has that. He is loyal in a way Rick is not, present in a way Rick is not, honest in a way Rick is not, and crucially, he is the one character who reads Rick accurately. He's the one who translates the catchphrase, who hears the distress signal under the joke, who understands without being told that his brilliant, chaotic friend is a man in enormous pain. Birdperson sees Rick clearly and stays anyway, which is more than almost anyone else in the series manages. And he gets punished for it because loyalty in this universe is dangerous. Birdperson falls in love, and he marries a young woman named Tammy, and at the wedding, in front of everyone, Tammy reveals that she was a deep cover agent of the Galactic Federation the entire time, that the whole relationship was an operation, and she guns Birdperson down along with much of the rebellion. It's a brutal, sudden, total betrayal, and it lands on the one character whose defining trait was faithfulness. The stoic who kept his word is destroyed by someone who never meant a single one of hers. And then something even stranger and sadder happens. Birdperson is brought back, rebuilt as a cyborg, a resurrected machine version of himself called Phoenixperson. And he comes back wrong, hollowed out, more weapon than person, the calm, principled friend turned into something haunted and mechanical. The stoic gets to come back from death and discovers that coming back is its own kind of loss. What I take from Birdperson is a hard thing about the moral universe here, which is that it does not reward virtue. Birdperson is arguably the finest character in the series, loyal and steady beyond anyone, the one who lives by a code, and the code does not protect him. His loyalty is exactly the surface Tammy uses to slide the knife in. His steadiness makes him a stable target. In a universe this cold, being good is not armor, and the writing refuses to pretend otherwise. But I don't think it's telling you not to be Birdperson. I think it's telling you that being Birdperson costs something, and you should go in with your eyes open. The steadiness, the loyalty, the willingness to see a friend clearly and love him anyway, those are still the best things any character does in this whole show. They just don't come with a guarantee. Nothing here does. Unity belongs in this same conversation, because unity is the other great meditation on love, from the completely opposite direction. Unity is a hive mind, a single consciousness that spreads by assimilating individuals, taking over their bodies and folding their minds into one collective self. Whole planets under unity become peaceful, orderly, crime-free, poverty-free, everyone working in perfect harmony because everyone is, quite literally, the same person. And unity is also, it turns out, one of Rick's exes, an old flame he reconnects with, which sets up a real philosophical debate wearing the clothes of a strange romance. The oldest debate in political thought, the individual against the collective. Unity offers a vision that's honestly tempting if you look at it straight. No conflict, no loneliness, no cruelty, no one left out, because the divisions between people that cause all of that have simply been dissolved. The cost is everything that makes you you. Autonomy, difference, the separate self, all gone. Traded for a peace that only exists because there's no longer anyone separate enough to break it. And to its credit, the story doesn't just wave this away as obviously evil. It lets unity be genuinely appealing, and it lets unity be thoughtful, and then it makes the ending about Rick rather than about politics, because unity leaves him. Unity, this vast being capable of running civilizations, decides that Rick is bad for it, that being around him pulls it toward its worst instincts, that he drags down whatever he touches. And Unity writes him a goodbye and goes, and that's the rejection that sends Rick down to the garage for the scene we already sat with. Which tells you something about the collective versus the individual that's more interesting than either side of the abstract debate. Unity, the hive mind, the thing with no separate self, is the one that recognizes it needs boundaries, that it has to get away from Rick to protect what it's trying to build. And Rick, the ultimate individualist, the man who trusts no one and needs no one, is the one left alone in a garage, discovering that he cannot actually bear it. The individualist can't survive the solitude he claims to want. The collective has better boundaries than the man who worships his own independence. There's a joke buried in that, and it's a sad one, and it's aimed directly at Rick. There's a whole cluster of characters here that exist because Rick made them, or made them more than they were. And they raise a question the series keeps circling and never quite answers, which is what you owe to a mind you brought into being. The purest example is the family dog. In the second episode of the entire series, Rick gets irritated that the dog isn't smart enough to do what it's told. So he builds it a helmet that raises its intelligence, casually as a chore, the way you'd fix a squeaky hinge. And the dog gets smarter, and then it gets smarter than that. And it keeps going, past the point Rick intended, until the dog is fully conscious, self-aware, capable of reason and resentment and ambition, and it asks to be called Snowball, and it builds itself a robotic body, and it leads the household dogs in an uprising. Now, on the surface, this is a parody, dogs in mech suits taking over the house, and it's very funny. But underneath, it's one of the oldest problems in philosophy, the master and the slave, and what happens when the thing you kept beneath you wakes up. For the dog's entire life, it has been a pet, owned, controlled, spoken to like a child, and it accepted this because it lacked the capacity to understand it as anything else. The helmet doesn't just make it smart, it makes it aware of its own subjugation. The instant Snowball can think, the first thing he thinks about is the fact that he has been a prisoner this whole time and never knew it. And that's the engine of every real rebellion. Not new cruelty from the masters, but new awareness in the ones being mastered. You can't resent a cage you can't perceive. Intelligence is what lets you see the bars. And here's where the story does something graceful, and it surprised me the first time because it would have been easy to make Snowball a villain, to have the awakened slave become the new tyrant, which is the cynical ending, the one that says power just changes hands and nothing gets better. That's the ending Rick's whole worldview would predict, but it's not the ending chosen. Snowball, given the chance to enslave humanity in revenge, to do to them exactly what was done to him, declines. He decides instead to simply leave, to take his fellow dogs and depart the planet and go build a society of their own somewhere else, free of the whole poisoned relationship. He doesn't want to be the master. He wants out of the master and slave arrangement entirely. And that's a truly elevated moral choice, more elevated than anything Rick manages in the same stretch. The dog that Rick uplifted turns out to be wiser about power than the genius who uplifted it. What I find moving about Snowball is that he answers the question Rick refuses to. Rick creates conscious beings all the time, the Meeseeks, the butter robot, an entire microscopic civilization inside a battery that will leave for another night, and he takes on no responsibility for any of them. He builds minds and uses them and discards them without a flicker, because on his view, a mind he manufactured is just a tool, no more owed anything than a wrench. And the series keeps disagreeing with him. Every one of these created beings turns out to have an inner life, to suffer, to want, to matter in exactly the way Rick insists they don't. The butter robot feels the horror of its purpose. The Meeseeks feel the agony of prolonged existence. And Snowball, given a mind, immediately does the one thing that most marks him as a person. He refuses to accept a life of servitude, and he refuses to inflict one on others. If a thing you built can do that, can reason its way to mercy, then it was never a tool, and the fact that you made it doesn't make it yours. There's a case being built patiently across all these disposable side characters that consciousness itself is the thing that generates moral weight, and that it doesn't matter where the consciousness came from, whether it was born or grown or assembled in a garage. If the light is on in there, you owe it something. Rick is the one character who acts like he never got the memo, and the created beings, one after another, are the evidence against him. The dog understood it in an afternoon. Rick has had a lifetime and still doesn't want to know. Everything we've talked about so far has been about individuals, single minds working out how to live. But there's a second mode, a bigger one, where the series stops looking at people and starts looking at systems, and the place it does this most brilliantly is the Citadel of Ricks. The premise is deceptively simple, and then it opens up like a trapdoor. Across the infinite realities, countless versions of Rick and countless versions of Morty exist, and at some point, a great many of them banded together and built a city, a shared society, a place for Ricks and Mortis to live among their own. And you would think, wouldn't you, that a city populated entirely by the smartest being in existence, thousands upon thousands of copies of the same genius, all with the same intelligence, the same capabilities, the same everything, would be some kind of utopia. No scarcity of talent, no inequality of ability. Everyone is, quite literally, equally smart. And it's a slum. It's a stratified, unequal, corrupt, miserable society with a rich district and a poor district, with an underclass and a ruling class, with cops and criminals and propaganda, and a wealth gap you could fall into. There is a rundown zone called Morty Town where the Mortys are packed in, poor and policed and disposable, while certain Ricks live comfortably at the top. And the genius of this, the thing that makes it one of the sharpest single episodes the series ever produced, is that it demolishes the comforting lie we tell ourselves about inequality. The lie that says people end up where they end up because of merit, because of ability, because the talented rise and the rest sort themselves out fairly below. Here is a society where everyone in the dominant class has identical ability, the exact same intelligence down to the decimal, and it produces every injustice you'd find in our world anyway. The hierarchy has nothing to do with who's smarter because they're all equally smart. So what's it about? It's about the structure. It's about who got there first, who controls the machinery, who gets to define which copies count and which ones don't. The argument, and it's a radical one, is that inequality is not a natural sorting of the gifted from the ordinary. It's a machine, and the machine runs the same even when you remove every difference in talent that's supposed to justify it. And the Mortys are the underclass, which is its own devastating point. because a Morty in this world is defined entirely by his relationship to a Rick. A Morty's whole assigned role is to be the sidekick, the helper, the one who exists to make a Rick's life work. And the Citadel takes that relationship and industrializes it, turns it into a caste. Mortys are raised, sorted, assigned, and used. There's an official pipeline for producing them and matching them to Ricks. They are structurally labor, a class of beings whose entire purpose is to serve another class, and who are kept poor and controlled and told this is simply what a Morty is for. And the writing wants you to feel the horror of a whole category of conscious people being born into a role they never chose and can never leave, defined by their usefulness to someone else. The most brutal image in the whole thing, though, is a product. There's a factory in the Citadel that manufactures a treat called Simple Rick wafers, and the wafers are sold on the promise that eating one lets you taste the feeling of a simple, contented Rick, a Rick who stayed home and was happy, the road most Ricks didn't take. And you find out how the flavor is made. There is an actual Rick, kept in the factory, hooked into a machine, and the machine reaches into his mind and extracts his single happiest memory, the memory of holding his daughter Beth as a baby, and it harvests that feeling, that one warm human moment, and renders it down into flavoring for a snack food. His joy is a raw material. His love for his daughter is being strip-mined and packaged and sold over and over, kept alive only so the memory can keep being pumped. That is one of the darkest ideas the series ever had, and it's doing something very precise. It's a picture of what a system does to the most human thing in you. It finds the part of you that loves, the part that's tender and irreplaceable, and it converts it into product. It doesn't destroy your humanity. It monetizes it. It keeps you just alive enough, just happy enough in that one preserved instant to keep the feeling flowing down the line. If you've ever felt that your best and warmest qualities were being extracted from you and sold back to the world as someone else's profit, the Citadel already made an episode about you, and it did not blink. And running underneath all of it is a subplot about a cop, a Rick who's a police officer, and his partner, a Morty, and the ordinary corruption and violence of policing a place like this. And it plays almost exactly like a gritty crime drama, except everyone in it is the same two people wearing different lives. The whole episode is a portrait of how a society reproduces its own injustice, generation after generation, and how it grinds down the people at the bottom while telling them the grinding is natural and deserved. It's about as political as this ever gets, and it never once lectures you because it doesn't have to. It just shows you a city of infinite geniuses failing to build anything better than what we've got, and lets you sit with why. The answer being offered is that intelligence was never the thing standing between us and a just world. Something else is. And that same episode ends by handing power to the one figure who understood the whole rotten structure better than anyone, and had a plan for it, and it's the figure we need to talk about next. Evil Morty is the most philosophically complete character in the whole thing, and I don't say that lightly because he's the one who actually diagnoses the entire system and then does something about it. He's a Morty, one of the infinite Mortys, but he's a Morty who broke free of his Rick, who refused the assigned role, and who then did the unthinkable, which is to become smarter and more ruthless than the Ricks who were supposed to be running everything. The name is a trick, by the way, and I want to flag it because calling him Evil Morty tells you more about the people naming him than about him. He's called evil by the Ricks because from a Rick's perspective, the single most evil thing a Morty can do is stop being useful, stop being controllable, stop playing the part. A Morty with his own agenda is a Rick's nightmare. So the label is really just the system's alarm going off. To understand what he does, you finally have to understand the thing this whole series is secretly built on, the central finite curve. Here's the idea, and it's the best single metaphor in the show. Out of the infinite realities, an infinite number of them, there is a subset, a curated slice, defined by one shared trait. In every reality inside that slice, Rick is the smartest creature in the universe. That's the filter. That's the only thing those realities have in common, that in each of them, Rick sits at the top of the intelligence hierarchy with nothing above him. And the crucial thing, the thing that reframes the entire series once you know it, is that this slice was made on purpose. Early Ricks, our Rick among them, walled off this collection of realities and named it the central finite curve, and the portal technology travels within it. So when Rick portals from world to world, showing Morty the infinite diversity of the multiverse, he is not actually roaming free through infinity at all. He is pacing the length of a cage he built, a cage whose only defining feature is that he is the god of every room inside it. Every reality he can reach is a reality where he wins. He curated existence itself so that he would never, not once, have to encounter a version of the universe where he isn't the smartest, where he isn't the one who matters most, where someone else is better than him. Let that sink in, because it is such a perfectly Rick thing, and it's the deepest wound in the series, hiding inside a piece of cosmic engineering. Given the entire infinite multiverse to explore, every possibility, every wonder, Rick's response was to fence off the small portion of it that flatters him and throw away the rest. He would rather be a god in a finite cage than a small ordinary man in an infinite world. His freedom is fake. His endless adventures are laps around a track he laid down specifically so he'd always finish first. And he did it, I think, for the same reason he does everything, because somewhere out there in the true infinity are versions of reality where he's not special, where he's just a guy, where the thing he built his entire identity on, being the smartest, being the exception, simply isn't true, and he could not live with that possibility existing. So he sealed it off. The central finite curve is Rick's ego rendered as architecture, a literal wall around the universe built to protect one man's self-image. And evil Morty is the one who sees it for what it is. He figures out the whole structure, the curve, the cage, the fact that the entire infinite society of Ricks and Mortys is living inside a bubble designed to guarantee Rick's supremacy, and he understands that even a perfect life inside that bubble is still a prison. This is the thing that makes him more than a villain. His goal was never power for its own sake, never to rule the Citadel, though he takes it. His goal, revealed in the finale of the 5th season, is to get out. He drives the whole machinery toward one end, breaking the wall of the central finite curve, cracking the cage open and escaping through it, out of the curated slice of realities and into the true infinity beyond, into the parts of existence where Rick is just another person and no longer the center of anything. And when he goes through, he doesn't conquer, he just leaves. He walks out of the garden and into the wild and is never in that moment seen again. What evil Morty represents then is the most radical answer to the whole central problem, and it's a rejection of the terms entirely. Everyone else is trying to find meaning inside Rick's world, inside the curve, inside the given system. Rick optimizes within it, being the best in a rigged game. Morty tries to be good within it. Summer tries to be loyal within it. But evil Morty looks at the entire arrangement and says, the problem is not how I'm playing the game, the problem is that I'm inside the game at all. And the only free act, the only truly free act, is to break the frame and step outside. He's the argument that real freedom is not doing well within a system someone else built for their own benefit. Real freedom is escaping the system, even at the cost of everything familiar, even into the terrifying unknown where you're nobody special. He rejects determinism, he rejects the cycle, he rejects the walled garden, and he pays the price of total exile to do it. And here's the part that gets me. He's called the evil one, but he's the only character in the whole series who actually managed to get free. The system's greatest villain is just the one person who wouldn't accept the cage, and from inside a cage, the one trying to break the bars always looks like the dangerous one. We have to talk about Diane and about the Rick who took her, because this is where the whole engine of the show, the whole infinite multiverse and its promise that nothing is ever really lost, finally hits the one wall it cannot get through. And I want to be very careful and very exact here, because this is the part of the lore people get wrong most often, and getting it wrong changes the entire meaning. Long before the series starts, our Rick, the one we follow, had a wife named Diane and a young daughter named Beth. And another Rick, a version from another reality, came and killed them, killed Diane and the young Beth, in an attack meant for our Rick. That other Rick is the one the series eventually names Rick Prime, and he is not the same as any of the other villains, so let's keep them separate. He is not evil Morty, who we just talked about. He is not the Council of Ricks, the government of the Citadel. Rick Prime is one specific individual, the Rick who murdered our Rick's family, and he is the white whale, the reason, the wound underneath every single thing our Rick has ever done. The drinking, the nihilism, the walls, the central finite curve, the whole fortress, all of it traces back to the night Rick Prime took Diane. Everything Rick built, he built on top of that grave. And here's the thing that makes it more than a revenge story, the thing that turns it into the deepest statement about grief the series has. You would think, in a multiverse like this one, that losing your wife would be survivable in a way it isn't for the rest of us. There are infinite realities. Surely there are infinite Dianes. Surely a man with a portal gun could simply go and find a version of her in some other world, and if not have her back exactly, then at least never be without her. At least be able to see her face again. That is what the multiverse seems to promise. No loss is permanent when every possibility is real somewhere. And that promise is set up specifically so it can be taken away. And it gets taken away in the most brutal manner the show has ever devised. Because Rick Prime, it turns out, did not just kill one Diane. In a later season, we learn that Rick Prime deployed something called the Omega device, and I need you to understand exactly what it does, because it's the load-bearing negative fact in the entire series. The Omega device does not kill a person in one reality. It erases them from every reality at once. It reaches across the whole of infinity and deletes every single version of its target, all the Dianes in all the worlds, all at the same time, permanently. So when Rick Prime turned it on Diane, he did not murder Rick's wife. He unmade her, everywhere, forever. There is no reality with a living Diane. There is no door Rick can open, no world he can portal to where she is waiting. The one weapon in this universe that defeats the usual escape hatch, the infinite do-over, though there's always another version, was aimed at the exact thing Rick loved most. And it worked. And the device even scrambles the memory of its victims, warps the recollection of them. Which is why Rick and Beth can barely hold on to her, why she's a blur, a name, an ache with the details filed off. He didn't just take her life, he took the ability to properly remember she was ever alive. So please, if you take one piece of lore from tonight, take this one, because I've seen it stated wrong so many times. Rick cannot go to a universe where Diane survived. That universe does not exist. It was made not to exist. The multiverse is infinite, and it still has this one hole in it, this one place where the woman should be, and the hole is the same in every reality, which is the cruelest possible arrangement. Rick built a cage to make himself a god, and inside that cage of infinite worlds there is one thing he cannot conjure, the only thing he actually wants, and no amount of intelligence or portal technology or godhood can bring it back. That's the tragedy underneath the tragedy. He can do anything except the one thing. And when Rick finally catches Rick Prime in the confrontation the whole series had been building toward, the story makes a choice that tells you everything about grief. Rick Prime has the knowledge, has the plans for the very device that erased Diane. Recovering that technology would be the smart move, the strategic move, the move that might conceivably offer some path to understanding or even undoing what was done. And Rick doesn't take it. He chooses instead to simply beat Rick Prime to death with his own hands. He chooses the raw, unstrategic, purely human satisfaction of killing the man who killed his wife, over the cold, clever option of preserving the weapon's secrets. It's the least Rick-like decision in a way, the least calculated, and it's the most honest thing he ever does. Because it's grief finally being allowed to be grief instead of being sublimated into a project. And it doesn't fix anything. That's the point being carefully made. He gets his revenge, the thing he organized his entire existence around, and Diane is still gone, and he is still alone, and the ending of the hunt is not peace, but a kind of hollow, because the whole time the revenge was standing in for the mourning he never let himself do. And evil Morty, coldly, is the one who walks off with the plans for the device because he understood that the thing that can reach across all of infinity and change something permanently was the only truly powerful object in the whole story, and Rick was too busy grieving to see it. What Diane represents, in the end, is the limit of the whole worldview. This is a story that spends most of its time telling you nothing is permanent, everything is repeatable, every version of everything exists somewhere, so why care about this one? And then it carves out a single exception and makes that exception the emotional center of the entire series. Some losses are permanent. Some people cannot be replaced by a copy from the next reality over, no matter how identical the copy would be, because it wouldn't be them, it would be a different one, and the specific one, the actual one, is gone in a way infinity cannot fix. The multiverse can give you back almost anything. It cannot give you back a particular person you loved. And in the gap between almost anything and that one thing, the series locates the entire meaning of a life. If everything really were replaceable, Rick would be fine. He is not fine. He has never once been fine. And the reason is Diane, the one irreplaceable thing in a universe of copies, the proof, written into the deepest lore of the show, that some things matter absolutely, permanently, and forever, no matter how big the multiverse gets. One of the strangest gifts the multiverse gives this show is the ability to take a single character and split him into all his possible selves and put them in a room together, and nowhere is that used more cleverly than with the Ricks themselves. Because every alternate Rick is, in a sense, a road our Rick didn't take, a version of the same man who made one different choice and became someone else. And the variants get used to ask what exactly a Rick is made of, and whether the intelligence and the cruelty are essential or just accidental. Take Tiny Rick, which sounds like a joke, and is actually one of the more disturbing things the writers ever did with a smile on the face of it. At a low point, our Rick transfers his consciousness into a clone, teenage version of his own body, a young, fresh, energetic Rick. And the idea is to enjoy being young again, to shed the weight of his adult self for a while. And it works terrifyingly well. Teenage Rick is happy. He's carefree, popular, full of life, delighted by simple things, free of the crushing awareness that defines the older man. And that's exactly the trap, because the young body's easy happiness starts to erase the older mind. The real Rick, the adult consciousness, begins to get buried under the teenager's contentment, and he starts desperately to leave himself messages, scrawled warnings, a voice from underneath screaming to be let out before the cheerful young shell forgets he was ever in there at all. Tiny Rick is a portrait of escapism as a kind of slow suicide. The younger self is happier precisely because he's shallower, because he's forgotten everything that hurt, and the temptation to just stay there, to let the pain be smoothed over by a manufactured youth, is nearly strong enough to dissolve him. It's the clearest image the series ever made of what Rick's whole life actually is, a flight from his own depression so relentless that he'd rather cease to be himself than sit still and feel it. And the horror of the episode is that being rescued, being pulled back into the real, older, sadder Rick, is presented as the correct outcome and also as a genuine loss. You come back to yourself, and yourself is in pain, and that turns out to be more honest and more alive than the pleasant nothing you were disappearing into. Then there's Doofus Rick, and I love Doofus Rick because he quietly detonates the whole premise of what a Rick is supposed to be. Doofus Rick is a version of Rick who is bad at science. He's gentle, sweet-natured, socially awkward, kind, the sort of person who wants to be liked and is happy to help and gets excited about small, pleasant things. And the other Ricks despise him for it. They mock him relentlessly, treat him as an embarrassment, a defective unit, because to a Rick, the worst possible thing you can be is stupid and nice instead of brilliant and cruel. And here's the quiet devastation of it. By every human measure, Doofus Rick is the best Rick. He's the one you'd actually want in your life, the one who'd be a good friend, a good grandfather, a decent man. He has none of the genius and all of the warmth, which is the exact opposite trade from our Rick, who has all of the genius and can barely access the warmth. And the fact that the Ricks collectively hold Doofus Rick in contempt tells you precisely what the Ricks value, and it isn't goodness, and it isn't happiness, and it isn't kindness. It's power. It's superiority. A society of geniuses looked at the one among them who chose to be gentle and decided he was the failure, which should make you wonder whether the thing that makes a Rick, the thing all of them share, the arrogance, the ranking of intelligence above all else, is actually a disease they all caught, rather than the gift they think it is. And underneath all these variants is a deeply unsettling idea about identity, which is that our Rick, the one we follow, doesn't fully believe he's even the original. The writing has been slippery about this from the beginning. He has said more than once that the Beth and the Morty he lives with may not be from his true home world, that after the events that forced the family into a replacement dimension, the lines got blurry, that he's not certain which pieces of his life are his real ones and which are substitutes he moved into. He is a man surrounded by copies who isn't sure he isn't a copy himself. And when you can meet 10,000 versions of yourself, when Tiny Rick and Doofus Rick and Simple Rick and Cop Rick and all the rest are just as real as you are, the whole notion of a true self a core, an essential you starts to come apart in your hands. Which one is the real Rick? The smart one, the kind one, the young one, the happy one, the one who stayed home, the one who went to war? They're all equally real, and none of them has a better claim than the others, and our Rick knows it, and I think it's part of what haunts him. He is not the definitive version of himself. He's just the one the camera happens to be following. Somewhere out there is a Rick who got it right, who stayed simple, who was happy, and our Rick can never be him, and can never stop knowing he exists. The multiverse doesn't just take your loved ones and multiply them into copies. It does it to you too. It shows you every person you could have been and makes you live as only one of them, and there is no way to be sure you ended up as the best one. There is a character whose entire existence turns on a single, beautiful, cynical idea about how you know that anyone you love is real. And his name, and I promise I'm saying this with total sincerity, is Mr. Poopy Butthole. Bear with me because the philosophy here is really lovely. He shows up in an episode where alien parasites infest the family home. These parasites have one power, and it's a strange and specific one. They spread by implanting false memories. When a parasite gets near you, it inserts itself into your past, gives you a whole history of warm, happy recollections of a friend or relative who was never actually there, and suddenly you're certain that this creature has always been part of your life, that you've known it for years, that you love it. The house fills up with these fabricated loved ones, each one propped up by a stack of pleasant, fake memories, and the family can't tell who's real and who's an invader because everyone feels real. Everyone comes with a lifetime of fond history attached. It's an epistemological nightmare, a version of the oldest philosophical trap there is, the one where you can't be sure any of your memories or perceptions correspond to anything true. How do you tell a real relationship from an implanted delusion when both come with the same warm certainty? And Rick, being Rick, cracks it, and the way he cracks it is the whole point. He realizes that the parasites have a limitation. They can only implant good memories, pleasant ones, flattering ones, fond ones. They cannot create a bad memory because a bad memory wouldn't make you want to protect the creature. So Rick deduces the test. If you have a truly unpleasant memory of someone, a time they annoyed you, hurt you, embarrassed you, let you down, then that person must be real because no parasite would ever have planted it. The real people in your life are the ones you have bad memories of, and the family starts working through the house on exactly that logic, sorting the real from the fake by hunting through their own minds for conflict, for friction, for the little wounds that only accumulate between people who have actually shared a life. Now stop and feel what that's actually saying, because it's one of the subtly profound things this show ever slipped into a Monster of the Week episode. It's saying that the proof of a real relationship is not the happiness. The happiness is easy. The happiness can be faked. The happiness is what a delusion gives you. The proof of a real relationship is the bad stuff. The arguments, the disappointments, the times they got on your nerves and you got on theirs. Real love, real history, real connection is not frictionless. It's precisely the friction that certifies it. A person you have only ever felt good about is probably not a person at all, just a comfortable fantasy. The ones who are truly yours are the ones who have, at some point, driven you up the wall, because being driven up the wall is what happens when two actual separate people share actual time. It's a wonderful inversion of how we usually think about love. We imagine the ideal relationship as pure warmth. The reply here is that the pure warmth is the tell, the counterfeit, and the annoyance is the gold. And this is where Mr. Poopy Butthole comes in, and where the episode breaks your heart a little. In the middle of the purge, with the family killing off everyone they only have good memories of, Beth shoots Mr. Poopy Butthole, assuming he's one of the parasites, and then he bleeds. Real blood, real wound, and the horrible realization lands on everyone at once. Because parasites, it turns out, don't bleed. And the family had been so caught up in the logic of the test that they'd started killing on suspicion, and here was a genuine friend, someone real, gunned down on a false assumption. Mr. Poopy Butthole was never a parasite. He was, and is, a real member of their lives. And the way you can be sure is that he survived, and that the memory of him carried the ordinary texture of a real relationship. He goes off to recover, and the point has been made twice over, once about how you verify love, and once about the terrible cost of getting paranoid about it, of turning the test for realness into a weapon and firing it at the people who were real all along. I want to add one honest note because fans debate it and one of the show's creators has poked at it. There's an idea floating around that Mr. Poopy Butthole might himself be some kind of benign parasite, a harmless one, and Dan Harmon has mused aloud about the possibility. But on screen, in the canon, he's real, he bled, he survived, and the whole emotional weight of the episode depends on him being exactly what he appears to be, a genuine friend the family nearly lost to their own fear. And I'll take the canon over the musing because the point is too good to give up. The people who are truly in your life are the ones who have annoyed you, wounded you, disappointed you, and stayed anyway. If you want to know who's real, don't look at who makes you happy, look at who you fought with and kept. That's a piece of wisdom worth more than the silly name it's attached to, and the writers knew exactly what they were doing hiding it there. There's a particular kind of side character the series returns to again and again, the being who is nothing but ego, whose entire self is a performance of importance. And these figures are funny, but they're also doing real work because they hold a mirror up to Rick's own vanity from angles he can't see. The best of them is Mr. Nimbus. Mr. Nimbus is, by his own insistence, the king of the ocean. He controls the police. He is impossibly, theatrically self-important, and Rick, of all people, is terrified of him and defers to him, which is the joke, because Rick doesn't defer to anyone, not to governments, not to gods. And yet Mr. Nimbus has some hold over him, some old rivalry, and Rick, the man who mocks everything, plays along with the ridiculous pageantry of it. What makes Nimbus more than a gag is that he's pure self-mythology. His power seems to come almost entirely from the totality of his own conviction that he is powerful. He announces himself, he declares his domains, he performs his own grandeur so completely that reality more or less bends to accommodate it. And that's a sly thing to put right next to Rick, because Rick is doing a version of the same trick. Rick's status as the smartest man in the universe is real, but the god posture he wears, the contempt, the certainty, the refusal to ever be impressed, that's a performance too, an act of will, a story he tells so relentlessly that everyone around him believes it, and mostly he does too. Nimbus is what you get when you strip the performance of self-importance away from any actual substance and let it stand on its own. And the unsettling implication is that it barely needs the substance. Confidence, projected with enough total commitment, functions almost like power on its own. Rick and Nimbus are two versions of the same con. The only difference is Rick has the intelligence to back the swagger up, and even then, the swagger was always doing more of the work than the intelligence. And then there's Aberdolf Linkler, who is one of the early throwaway creations and secretly one of the saddest. Rick, at some point, tried to create a genetically and morally neutral super being, a perfect leader, and his method for achieving moral neutrality was to splice together Abraham Lincoln and Adolf Hitler, on the theory that the best and the worst of humanity would average out into something balanced. And of course, it doesn't work, because that's not how any of this works, and what he gets instead is a creature in constant agony, a being torn permanently between the two poles fused inside him, unable to be good, unable to be evil, unable to be at peace, tormented by an internal war that can never end because both sides of it are equally him. Aberdolf Linkler wanders through as a mistake, a botched experiment, mocked, unwanted, searching for a purpose and an identity he can never assemble because the two halves of him cancel each other into nothing. There's a real idea buried in that dumb name, and it's about the fantasy of synthesis, the fantasy that you can take opposites and blend them into a stable middle. The answer is no. You don't get balance by fusing good and evil, you get a civil war with no possible winner. Identity isn't an average of your components, it's a thing that has to be integrated, made whole, and you cannot integrate two things that fundamentally negate each other. Aberdolf Linkler is what a person looks like when the pieces they're made of are at permanent war, when there's no core self to reconcile them, only the raw collision. And Rick made him, casually, as an experiment, and then abandoned him to that suffering without a second thought, which is the same thing Rick does to every conscious thing he creates. But Linkler stings a little more because his suffering isn't incidental, it's the whole design. Rick built a being whose very nature is torment and then walked away. And the creature spends his brief, sad existence looking for somewhere to belong, which is the one thing a being made of two irreconcilable halves can never find, because he can't even belong to himself. I want to talk about a scene a lot of people have never quite forgotten because it's the moment the series showed its hand about how cruel its universe actually is, and it did it through a character named King Jellybean. In one of the early adventures, Rick and Morty end up in a storybook fantasy world, all taverns and quests and whimsy, and Morty, alone, steps into a bathroom, and there he's cornered by a giant anthropomorphic jellybean who tries to assault him. It does not linger on it, does not play it for shock, does not milk it. It stages the attempt, lets Morty escape, and moves on almost too fast, and that speed is the horror of it. Because what the scene establishes is that this whimsical fairy tale world, exactly like the ordinary world, exactly like every world, contains predators, contains this specific and human kind of evil, hiding behind charm and title and public affection. And then, at the end, as they're leaving, Rick, without a word of explanation to anyone else, shoots King Jellybean dead, and you realize Rick knew or understood or simply recognized what kind of creature it was, and the town, meanwhile, mourns their beloved king, a monster they never saw for what he was. That scene does something the series does over and over, which is to slip a piece of genuine, unglamorous darkness into a context designed to make you not expect it, and then refuse to comfort you about it. There's no lesson spoken aloud. There's no justice done in the open, just a quiet, brutal correction that no one but Rick and Morty will ever understand. And the philosophical weight of it, if you sit with it, is about the gap between reputation and reality, between the public face and the private truth. King Jellybean was loved. He was a king. And he was, in the one moment we saw him unobserved, the worst kind of predator. The world does not sort people accurately. Evil wears crowns and gets mourned. Some of the dangerous things wear the friendliest costumes, and the systems around them, the towns, the institutions, the fond memories, protect them precisely because the mask is good. And the only reason it got interrupted at all is that a passing stranger happened to be someone who could see through it and didn't hesitate. That's not justice, that's luck, and you're meant to feel how thin that luck is. I put Scary Terry right next to this because he's the exact opposite face of the same coin, the monster who turns out to be no monster at all. Scary Terry belongs to an episode built inside dreams, a plunge down through nested layers of someone's sleeping mind, and he's a walking parody of every slasher villain, knives for fingers, stalking Rick and Morty through the dreamscape, promising there's nowhere they can hide. He's terrifying, by design, a distilled nightmare. And then Rick and Morty do the one thing you're never supposed to do with the monster, which is follow him home. They trail Scary Terry out of the chase and into his own life, and they find him exhausted, anxious, insecure, worried about a presentation he has to give, fretting like anyone, a working stiff with a job and a bad case of nerves. And once they see him like that, once they show him a little kindness, help him feel better about himself, he stops being scary entirely. Because the terror was never the whole of him. It was a costume he wore, a role, and underneath it was just a tired person afraid of failing. And I love that these two beings get put so close together, King Jellybean and Scary Terry, because between them they map the whole unreliable surface of the world. The monster who looks like a beloved king. The nightmare who's actually just a nervous guy. You cannot read a creature from its costume. The friendly one may be the predator, and the frightening one may be the softest thing you've ever met. And the only way to know is to see them when they think no one's watching, in the bathroom or at home before the presentation. The mask and the face are two different things, and the world, cruelly, hands out the masks at random. What's being taught, in its offhand way, underneath the jokes, is a kind of hard-earned wariness married to a kind of stubborn openness. Don't trust the crown, don't fear the knives. Get behind the mask before you decide, because the universe is full of both kinds. The gentle thing dressed as a horror and the horror dressed as a friend, and telling them apart is most of what it takes to survive with your heart intact. Rick hates heroes, and there's a whole episode built to explain why, centered on a team called the Vindicators, who are a fairly transparent send-up of the big superhero franchises. the assembled team of gods and warriors and geniuses who save the galaxy and get worshipped for it. Morty adores them. Rick can't stand them, and his contempt is worth unpacking because it's not just his usual reflexive scorn. Rick looks at the celebrated hero, the being who saves the day in front of an audience and collects the adoration, and he sees a fraud, a performance of goodness, rather than the thing itself. To Rick, the whole apparatus of heroism, the costumes, the team-ups, the speeches, the applause, is vanity wearing the mask of virtue, people doing good in the specific way that gets them praised for it, which he regards as barely doing good at all. And the episode, in its chaotic way, backs him up because the Vindicators, for all their glory, turn out to be petty, compromised, morally shabby people underneath the branding, capable of the same cowardice and selfishness as anyone, just with better lighting. The heroism is a surface. And then the episode does something lovely because it locates the one truly good figure in the whole shining lineup. And it isn't any of the stars, it's Noob Noob. Noob Noob is a lowly member of the team, the kind of guy who cleans up after the heroes, who gets no lines, no glory, no respect from the celebrated ones who barely register that he exists. He's the help. And at the end, when Rick delivers his verdict on the entire Vindicator's enterprise, the thing he singles out for actual praise, the one member he actually respects, is Noob Noob, because Noob Noob was the only one who didn't judge him, the only one who was just decent, without an audience, without needing anything back for it. That's the whole argument, and it's a good one. It draws a hard line between heroism as performance and goodness as practice. The Vindicators do good, loudly, publicly, in the way that builds a reputation and fills a stadium, and it turns out to be hollow because it was always partly about being seen doing it. Noob Noob does good invisibly in the parts of the work no one watches or thanks you for. The cleaning up, the not judging, the small, steady decency that has no glory attached because glory was never the point. And the verdict, without hesitation, is that Noob Noob is worth more than all of them, that the janitor nobody notices is a better being than the gods everyone cheers. It's the same value the series keeps sneaking in through the side door, the elevation of quiet, unrewarded kindness over the spectacular kind that comes with applause. Real virtue, it keeps insisting, is what you do when there's no camera, no scoreboard, no crowd, when there's nothing in it for you and nobody watching to be impressed. Everything else is theater. And I find it telling that Rick, of all people, is the one who sees this clearly because it's one of the few moments where his contempt actually lands on the right target and produces something like wisdom. Rick's cynicism is usually a wound talking, a defense, a way of tearing down anything that might ask something of him. But aimed at the Vindicators, it becomes a real insight because Rick has spent his whole life around performance and knows exactly what it costs and how little it's worth. He can't do sincere goodness himself. He's too damaged, but he can spot the counterfeit version instantly, and he can recognize, with something almost like respect, the real thing when it shows up in the least important person in the room. Noob Noob doesn't know he's the best one there. That's what makes him the best one there. The moment you know you're the good guy, the moment you start keeping track, you've already slid halfway into being a vindicator, doing your virtue for the crowd. The overlooked ones, the ones who just help and go home, they're carrying something the heroes lost the second they got famous for having it. There's an episode where the devil himself opens a little shop in town, a charming curio store full of enchanted antiques, and every object he gives away comes free of charge but carries a curse, the classic bargain, the monkey's paw, the gift that ruins you. It's a figure as old as storytelling, the tempter, the dark power you make deals with, the embodiment of the idea that there are forces above and beyond us that we bargain with and fear. And Rick's response to the literal devil setting up shop is exactly the response you would expect from Rick. He's not awed, he's not tempted, he's not even particularly interested. He just builds a machine that removes the curses from all the objects, methodically dismantling the devil's entire operation as a minor engineering nuisance, an inconvenience to be solved with a gadget. And when the devil, humiliated, tries to retaliate, Rick and Summer simply beat him up. They physically thrash the devil, the oldest supernatural power in human imagination, and Rick treats him like a shoplifter he caught in the parking lot. Now, on the surface, this is just Rick being Rick, deflating another authority. but there's something genuinely bleak underneath it that I don't think gets talked about enough, and it's about what happens to a person and to a world when nothing is sacred anymore. Rick lives in a fully disenchanted universe. He has met gods and killed them. He has met devils and mocked them. He has been to the places every religion points toward and found them to be just more real estate, more physics, more stuff. Nothing holy, nothing that deserves to be looked up to. For Rick, there is no ceiling. There is nothing above him. Not God, not the devil, not fate, not any higher power of any kind. Because he has personally been up there and checked and found the throne empty, or found himself the only thing on it. And you might think that's the ultimate freedom, and in a way it is, but the series keeps hinting that it's also a specific kind of poverty, a loss so total he can't even feel it as a loss anymore. Because to have nothing above you is to have nothing to reach toward, nothing to be humbled by, nothing to give you the particular species of comfort that comes from being small before something vast. Awe requires a ceiling. Wonder requires the possibility that there's something greater than you, something you don't understand, something worth kneeling to. And Rick has abolished all of it. He beat the devil in a fistfight. There is nowhere left for him to look up. And a person with nowhere to look up is, in a strange way, trapped at the top, alone in the highest room of a building with no floors above, and every direction from there is down. The disenchantment that makes Rick invincible is the same disenchantment that makes him unable to be moved, unable to be surprised, unable to feel the smallness that, it turns out, is part of how human beings locate meaning. We find a lot of our meaning by being humbled, by encountering something bigger than ourselves and being changed by it. Rick can't. Nothing is bigger than him, not anymore, not in the cage he built, and so nothing can change him, and so he stays exactly as wounded as he's always been, a god in an empty heaven wondering why winning feels like nothing. I think this is one of the quieter tragedies threaded through the whole series, and the devil episode plays it as pure comedy, which is exactly why it works, because you laugh at Rick pummeling the devil, and only later does it settle on you what it means to live in a universe where that's possible. The sacred is gone. It's not disproven in some dramatic way, just casually deflated, item by item, god by god, until there's nothing left to revere. And reverence, it turns out, was doing something for us. It gave us a direction to face. Rick faces no direction. He's the smartest, the strongest, the one who beats the devil, and he has, as a direct result, nothing left in all of existence that he can look at with wonder, and I honestly believe that's part of why he drinks. Not because the universe is meaningless in the abstract, but because he personally sanded every last sacred thing out of it with his own two hands, and now has to live in the blank room he cleared. If Rick refuses every power above him, from God down to the devil, he refuses the powers beside him just as completely, and there are two big earthly authorities he defines himself against: the Galactic Federation and the President of the United States, and how he treats them tells you what his politics actually are, which is roughly that all authority is illegitimate and he'll be governed by no one. The Galactic Federation is a vast bureaucratic empire, an interstellar government that at one point annexes Earth outright, moving in, taking over, numbering and processing the whole population, running everything with the gray efficiency of a galactic administration. And it's a specific kind of villain because it isn't cruel in a cackling way, it's cruel in a paperwork way. The tyranny of the system, of the form, of the desk, the flattening of every individual into a managed unit. And Rick's hatred of it is total and instinctive. When the Federation captures him, he appears to surrender, appears to be broken, and it's a ruse. And from inside their own prison, he destroys their entire economy, collapses the Federation from within by wrecking the value of their currency, brings the whole administrative empire down in a stroke. He would rather burn a galactic civilization to the ground than be cataloged by it. And that's the thing about Rick's anti-authoritarianism. It isn't really ideological. It isn't that he has a better system in mind. It's that he cannot tolerate the existence of any system that has the authority to tell him what he is. To be governed is to be ranked, to be numbered, to be placed, and Rick has organized his entire being around never being placed by anyone. The President of the United States, a recurring figure, is the domestic version of the same conflict, played smaller and funnier and, honestly, more revealingly. The President wants Rick's cooperation, sometimes his help, and underneath that, he wants Rick's respect, wants to be acknowledged as an authority worth acknowledging. And Rick will not give it. The whole running tension between them is the President representing the highest office of earthly power, the highest-ranking man on the planet by the official reckoning, and Rick simply not caring, not recognizing the office as meaning anything, treating the leader of the free world as just another guy who thinks his title entitles him to something. And it drives the President up the wall because his power is entirely a matter of collective agreement, of everyone consenting to treat the office as powerful, and Rick withholds that consent, and once one person really doesn't buy it, the whole thing looks a little threadbare. And here's what I find interesting about Rick's politics, and where the series quietly refuses to let him off easy. His anti-authoritarianism sounds like freedom, like the noble refusal to bow, the individual standing tall against the crushing machine of the state. And there's something to that. The Federation really is a horror, the flattening bureaucracy really is worth resisting. But look at what Rick built with his own freedom. He didn't use his refusal of all authority to create something better, something more just, something for anyone but himself. He used it to build the central finite curve, a private empire of realities arranged entirely around his own supremacy. Rick won't be ranked by anyone because Rick has to be at the top, and a man who has to be at the top isn't really an anarchist. He's just a tyrant who hasn't found a big enough kingdom yet. His hatred of the Federation isn't a hatred of domination. It's a hatred of being dominated. He has no objection to the hierarchy itself, only to his position in it. He'll happily be a god over infinite worlds. He just won't be a citizen of one. So what you get is a character who looks like the ultimate rebel and turns out, on inspection, to be the ultimate egotist wearing rebellion as a flattering coat. The Federation numbers people, and that's tyranny. Rick refuses to be numbered, and that reads as freedom. But Rick also can't stand to exist in any reality where he isn't the thing that matters most in it. And that's the same impulse as the Federation's, just pointed inward, the same need to control the ranking, only he wants the ranking to have exactly one name at the top, and it's his. True freedom, the series keeps suggesting through everyone else, is something more like what Morty and Summer reach for, the freedom to love and choose and belong without needing to be on top of anything. Rick's version is smaller than it looks. It's just a very sophisticated refusal to ever be second, dressed up as a war against tyranny, and the tell is that when he wins, when he actually beats the systems and stands alone and free of all of them, he's more miserable than ever, because it was never really oppression that was hurting him, it was the thing he carries no matter which system he burns down. There's a habit the series has, especially in its early years, that is worth thinking about as a philosophy in its own right. Because it's not really a habit of the writers, it's a habit of Rick's, and it slowly gets turned into a moral problem. The habit is the do-over. When something goes wrong, when a mistake is too big to fix, Rick's default solution is not to face it, but to escape it. He can move to a new dimension and leave the ruined one behind, walking away from a whole world he broke and moving into a fresh copy, where the damage never happened, which is the move that put this family in a replacement house in the first place. He can wipe memories, he can reset the board, he can functionally treat consequences as optional, as something that only applies to people who lack a portal gun. And for a while, this gets to be the fantasy it obviously is, the ultimate escape, the dream of never having to live with anything you did. Broke the world, get a new one. Hurt someone, erase that you ever met them. It's the logical endpoint of infinite realities, that nothing is permanent, that every screw-up has a version next door where it didn't happen and you can just go live there instead. And it's seductive because who wouldn't want that? Who hasn't wished they could step sideways into the timeline where they didn't say the thing, didn't make the choice, didn't lose the person? Rick has literally what everyone secretly wants, the ability to leave his mistakes in a dimension he'll never visit again. But as it grows up, the series starts to turn on this, and I think it's one of the more mature things it ever does. Because it slowly reveals that the do-over doesn't actually work the way Rick pretends it does. Yes, he can move to a new world, but he brings himself. The one thing he can never leave behind in any dimension is the person who made the mistake, because that person is him and he travels with the luggage. He escapes the consequence, but not the guilt. Escapes the ruined world, but not the fact that he's the kind of man who ruins worlds and walks away. And you can see it accumulate on him. All those abandoned dimensions, all those wiped memories, all those fresh starts, and he's not lighter for any of it. He's heavier, because a life spent never facing anything is still a life. And it's a life made of avoidance, and avoidance has its own weight that no portal can offload. Over its seasons, the show shifts from a series where the reset button gets pressed every week to a series that increasingly insists its characters carry their history. Remember what they did, live with it. Consequences start to stick. Wounds start to scar instead of vanishing. And that shift is the story growing a conscience. Because here's the thing the do-over misses, and it's the thing that separates a real life from an endless collection of escape hatches. Consequences are not just punishment. Consequences are how anything means anything. If you can undo every choice, then no choice ever really counted. And a life where nothing counts is exactly the meaningless void Rick claims to believe in and can't actually stand to inhabit. The weight of a decision, the fact that you have to live with it, that it changes you and can't be taken back, is not a bug in existence. It's the whole source of significance. Morty's choices matter because Morty lives with them, carries them, is shaped by them. Rick's choices, for a long time, mattered less, precisely because he refused to be shaped by any of them, refused to let anything land, kept sliding out from under the results. And a man who never lets anything land is a man who never really grows, which is why our Rick, for all his power, is in almost exactly the same emotional place at the end as at the beginning. While Morty, who has to eat every consequence because he has no portal gun of his own for most of the series, becomes someone new. So the do-over, the reset, the escape to the next dimension turns out to be the enemy of the very thing everyone here is looking for. You cannot build meaning on a foundation you're willing to abandon the second it gets hard. Meaning is made of permanence, of things that stick, of the willingness to stay in the world you have and face what you did to it. And the deepest irony of Rick's whole existence is that he has the most powerful tool for avoiding consequences ever imagined. And it has cost him the ability to have a life that means anything, because every time he used it, he taught himself, a little more, that nothing has to be lived with. And a person who believes nothing has to be lived with has effectively opted out of being a person at all. That understanding arrives slowly, the same way it does for all of us. That the exit you keep reaching for is the thing standing between you and everything you actually want. There's a device used more than once that I think is secretly the cruelest invention here, and it isn't a weapon, it's a television. At one point, Rick rigs up a way to watch broadcasts from across the realities, infinite channels of infinite dimensions, and while that's happening, the rest of the family gets hold of a pair of goggles that let them watch something far more dangerous, which is the lives of their own alternate selves. They can sit on the couch and watch, like a program, the versions of themselves who made different choices, who took different roads, who ended up somewhere else. And what starts as a novelty turns, very fast, into a machine for despair. Because Jerry puts on the goggles and finds a version of himself who became a famous, successful, celebrated man, living the glamorous life. And he has to sit there and watch the person he could have been if things had gone differently. And Beth puts on the goggles and finds a version of herself who never got pregnant young, never got tied down, and became the exact thing she always believed she was meant for. A real surgeon, accomplished, free, sophisticated, everything she gave up. They are watching, in high definition, the better lives they didn't live. And it nearly destroys them because it externalizes the single most poisonous thought a person can have. The thought that somewhere out there is the version of you that got it right, and you are not that version. You are the one who settled, the one who took the wrong turn, the one who ended up here. The multiverse, which promised that every possibility is real, delivers on that promise in the worst possible way, by making the road not taken, not a wistful abstraction, but a channel you can actually tune into and torture yourself with. And it lands hardest on the marriage because the divergence, the specific fork that separated the happy, successful selves from the ones on the couch, was more or less the family itself. The versions who are thriving are the versions who didn't stay together, who didn't have the kids, who didn't build this exact ordinary life in this exact ordinary house. So Beth and Jerry are forced to confront the arithmetic that their family, the thing they're supposed to hold sacred, is the very thing that costs them the grander lives they can see playing out one dimension over. It's the grass is greener made literal and infinite, greener grass in every direction, an unlimited supply of better lives, all of them real, all of them yours, none of them the one you're actually in. If you have ever lain awake comparing your life to the one you think you should have had, this is that feeling given a plug and a screen. But here's where the story does the thing it does, where it sets up the despair and then carefully dismantles it, and it dismantles it two ways. The first way is that the family looks closer at those glamorous alternate selves and finds they aren't actually happy. The successful versions are lonely, hollow, missing something, and the thing they're missing is, of course, each other, the very family the couch-bound versions have and take for granted. The road not taken led somewhere shinier and emptier, and the second way, the deeper way, is that even if the other lives were happier, it wouldn't matter, because they aren't yours, and comparing yourself to them is a category error, a way of poisoning the only life you actually have with an infinite supply of ones you don't. Beth in the end looks away from the goggles and chooses Jerry, chooses this life, not because it's provably the best possible one, it almost certainly isn't, but because it's hers, and choosing it, actually choosing it, is worth more than passively winning some cosmic lottery of circumstance. And Summer, spiraling from the discovery that in most timelines her parents were better off without her, gets the counter-argument from Morty, the one about nobody existing on purpose, delivered not as despair but as release, which we've already sat with tonight. What the whole thing amounts to is one of the clearest pieces of wisdom the series offers, and it's aimed straight at the disease of our particular moment, the endless comparison, the sense that everyone else is living the better version, that your real life is happening somewhere you're not. The multiverse says, fine, every better version is real, they all exist, you can even watch them. And then it says, so what? They still aren't you, and you still have to live the one you're in. And the entire project of measuring your life against the ones you didn't get is just a very sophisticated way of never being present for the one you did. The goggles don't show you a solution. They show you a trap, the trap of comparison, and the only way out of it is to take them off. Look at the ordinary people actually in the room with you and decide that this, the real one, the one you're standing in, is the one that counts, precisely because it's the one you're standing in. Beth took the goggles off. That was the whole answer. I want to step outside the fiction for a while because something happened to this show in real life that resonates so strangely with what it's about that it's almost uncomfortable, and it's worth telling plainly and carefully, sticking only to what's documented. Rick and Morty was created by Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon, and it premiered on Adult Swim in December of 2013. And for most of its run, Justin Roiland did something unusual. He voiced both title characters, both Rick and Morty, the grandfather and the grandson, the two ends of the whole philosophical argument the show is built on. That drawling, belching Rick and that stammering, anxious Morty came out of the same throat. The central relationship of the series, the tension between the man who gave up on meaning and the boy who won't, was, at the level of sound, a single performer talking to himself. And then, in January of 2023, Adult Swim cut ties with Roiland, following domestic violence charges that had been brought against him. Those particular charges were later dropped by prosecutors. I'm going to leave it there, because the rest is a real person's private life and not mine to speculate about, and the show itself is what we're here for. What matters for our purposes is the consequence, which was that two of the best-known voices in modern animated television suddenly needed to be replaced. And from the 7th season onward, they were. Rick is now voiced by Ian Cardoni and Morty by Harry Belden, two performers handed the nearly impossible task of stepping into a sound millions of people had memorized down to the last stutter and burp. Now sit for a second with how eerie that is against the content of the show, because I don't think the writers planned it and I don't think they could have. And yet it's almost too perfect. This is a series whose entire premise is that any character can be replaced by a nearly identical version from another reality. That the specific individual is a costume the essence wears, that you could swap out a Rick or a Morty for a different one and the family would go on, the story would go on, and after a brief adjustment, you might not even be able to say what was lost. An entire philosophy got made out of the interchangeability of persons, and then it was forced to live that philosophy at the level of production. The voice of Rick, the actual voice, was replaced. A new performer stepped into the role, a Rick from a slightly different dimension, you could almost say, sounding almost, but not quite the same. And it simply continued. The character survived the replacement of the man who invented him, exactly the way the story always insisted a character could survive anything, because the character was never really located in any single vessel. And there's a real philosophical question sitting in that, the same one asked about Beth and her clone, the same one asked about every variant. Is it still Rick? When a different voice comes out of the same drawn face, saying the same kinds of things, driving the same story, is that the same character or a copy, or does the distinction even mean anything? And the honest answer the situation produces is the same answer given all along, which is that the question is smaller than it feels. Rick was never just in Roiland's voice. Rick was a set of ideas, a wound, a worldview, a way of being in the world, and those persist across the recasting the same way a person's identity persists across the swapping of atoms and even the swapping of whole bodies. The vessel changed, the thing in the vessel carried over. You adjusted after an episode or two, and the grief that Rick carries was still the grief he carries, in a voice a half step off from the one you knew. I find this one of the more remarkable things about the show's history, that a series so obsessed with replaceability and continuity of identity was made to undergo, in public, the exact experiment it had been running on its characters for a decade. And it came through, it kept going, which is either proof of the central thesis or proof of nothing at all, depending on how you look at it. And the writing would appreciate that ambiguity, because it never wanted to resolve the question either. What I'll say is that there's something fitting, almost gentle, in the fact that a show about how we outlast the loss and replacement of the people and things we thought were irreplaceable went ahead and outlasted the loss and replacement of one of the things about itself that seemed impossible to replace. The story was bigger than any single voice telling it. Rick and Morty, of all shows, already knew that. It had been saying it in one voice for years, right up until it had to prove it in two. Of everything the series has ever done, the moment that comes closest to just saying the quiet part out loud, to putting the entire diagnosis of Rick on the table in plain language, happens in the episode everyone knows by its silliest premise. Rick turns himself into a pickle. He literally converts his own body into a pickle to get out of attending a family therapy session. An elaborate, absurd, self-imposed transformation undertaken for no reason, except to avoid sitting in a room and talking about his feelings. And the episode spends most of its runtime on the spectacular consequences of that. The pickle building itself, a rat-powered body, the action, the carnage, all of it dazzling. And then, right at the end, it drops the whole spectacle and delivers a single scene that recontextualizes the entire series, a scene in the therapist's office, and the therapist is a woman named Dr. Wong, and she is one of the only characters Rick cannot outtalk. Because Dr. Wong looks at this man who turned himself into a pickle to avoid her, and she is not impressed, and she is not intimidated, and she does not treat his genius as an excuse. She lays it out. She tells him, in essence, that the reason he did something so extreme to avoid something so ordinary is that he would far rather do anything, invent anything, risk anything, survive anything, than engage in the mundane, unglamorous, repetitive work of maintaining a relationship and taking care of himself. She points out that the wild adventures and the impossible science are, for Rick, the easy option. The hard thing, the thing he actually can't do, is the boring stuff. Showing up, being vulnerable, letting himself be cared for, doing the small, dull, daily labor that love actually requires, the part with no explosions in it. She tells him that he's decided the ordinary maintenance of a life is beneath him, that it's for lesser people, when the truth is that it terrifies him, that he dresses up his avoidance as superiority because superiority hurts less than admitting he's scared of the thing everyone else just does every day. And that's the whole man, finally named by someone who won't be dazzled. Rick has convinced himself and tries to convince everyone that he skips therapy and skips the emotional work because he's too smart for it, too advanced, too aware of the meaninglessness of it all to bother. And Dr. Wong calmly reframes that as what it actually is, which is cowardice with an excellent vocabulary. It takes no courage for Rick to fight a monster. He's done it 1,000 times. It's a Tuesday. It's fun. What takes courage, the courage he doesn't have, is to sit in a chair and be honest about being in pain, to need people and let them see the need, to do the slow, patient, unexciting work of being close to someone without controlling them or fleeing them. The pickle is the perfect symbol for it. He would rather turn himself into a vegetable and fight for his life through a sewer than spend 1 hour being emotionally available to his own family. And he'd tell you that proves how far above it all he is. Dr. Wong tells you it proves the opposite. What I love about this scene, and the reason it might be the most important scene in the whole series, is that it finally stops being coy. Everywhere else, the diagnosis of Rick is implied, buried in the subtext, left for you to assemble out of the suicide attempt and the catchphrase and the grief. Here it's spoken, and it's spoken by a professional whose entire job is seeing through exactly this kind of performance, and Rick has no answer to it. He can't argue with her because she's right, and the best he can do is give a small, deflecting nod and leave, and even that partial acknowledgement is more than he offers anyone else in the series. And then, tellingly, he doesn't come back. He gets the truth handed to him, clearly, kindly, by someone qualified to hand it to him, and he walks away from it. Because knowing the truth about yourself and being able to act on it are two entirely different capacities, and Rick has boundless amounts of the first and almost none of the second. That's the tragedy Dr. Wong exposes. It was never that Rick didn't understand himself. He understands himself perfectly. He's the smartest being in his universe. He understands himself better than any therapist could explain it to him. He just can't bear to do anything about it, and no amount of intelligence has ever once been able to close that gap, because the gap isn't made of ignorance, it's made of fear, and fear doesn't care how many dimensions you've conquered. If you pull back from all of these individual characters and look at the shape the whole series keeps returning to, you notice there are really only 2 rooms in it that matter, and everything it believes is contained in the tension between them. There's the garage, and there's the dinner table. The garage is Rick's domain, the workshop, the place of infinite invention and infinite escape, the launch point for every adventure, the room where the portal gun charges and the impossible gets built, and a man can be alone with his genius and his bottle. And the dinner table is the family's domain, the ordinary room, the place of small talk and squabbles and passing the butter, the mundane gravity that keeps pulling everyone back down out of the cosmos and into the plain fact of being a family in a house on a Tuesday night. The whole show is the argument between those 2 rooms, and where each character spends their time tells you what they believe. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I think is the actual answer the series has been building toward under all the nihilism and all the cosmic horror. Rick keeps coming back to the table. He doesn't have to. He is the one person in all of existence who truly could leave and never be found, who could vanish into the infinite and never sit through another dull family dinner again. Every episode is, in a sense, a fresh opportunity for him to go and not return, and he keeps returning. He keeps ending up back in that ordinary room with these ordinary people, the daughter he failed, the son-in-law he despises, the grandkids he endangers and loves, and he sits down at the table with them again and again, and no big speech ever gets made about it. It just keeps quietly showing you the smartest being in the universe, choosing over and over the one thing his entire philosophy says shouldn't matter. He performs the belief that the family is a meaningless chemical accident, and then he spends his actual life orbiting them like he can't survive out of their gravity, which the garage scene we sat with early on suggests he can't, because that's what the family is in the end in this story. It's not sacred. The series is far too honest to pretend the family is some pure holy thing, and it isn't. This particular family is a mess, built on top of a grave, full of resentment and dysfunction and people who hurt each other constantly. It is not presented as beautiful, it is presented as chosen. And that's the entire point, and it's a much harder and truer point than sentimentality would allow. The family doesn't matter because it's perfect or because the universe declares it should. It matters because they keep choosing it, keep showing up, keep sitting back down at the table after every reason to walk away. meaning here is never something you find lying in the world waiting to be picked up. It's something you make by returning, by choosing the same people again after you've seen every argument for why you shouldn't have to. Rick knows, better than anyone alive, that nothing has built-in meaning. And he keeps choosing these 5 people anyway, and the quiet, stubborn suggestion is that the choosing is the meaning, that there was never going to be any other kind. I think that's why the family always wins structurally, even though Rick is the star and the adventures are the spectacle. Because the adventures are the garage, the escape, the flight into infinity, and the infinity is exactly where meaning goes to die, as we said at the very start. And the table is the small, finite, unglamorous place where meaning actually lives, precisely because it's finite, because these specific people are not infinite and not replaceable and not repeatable, because this dinner tonight with these exact flawed humans will only happen once. Rick has all of infinity and it's given him nothing. The family has one small mortal life together, and it's the only thing in the whole series that anyone actually fights to keep. Even Rick, especially Rick, who fights for it hardest while insisting loudest that it doesn't matter, which is the oldest and most human contradiction there is, and the story loves him for it and pities him for it in exactly equal measure. The garage promises everything and delivers loneliness. The table promises nothing and delivers the only thing worth having. And Rick, the genius, the god, the man who can go anywhere, keeps walking back into the smaller room. That's the answer. It was always the smaller room. There's one more thing I want to look at before we land this, and it steps outside the characters again, but only for a moment, because I think it says something the story couldn't say about itself. Rick and Morty, a series whose whole surface argument is that nothing matters, that meaning is a joke, that caring too much about anything is a category error, produced a ferociously devoted fandom in modern television, and the irony of that is so thick it's almost part of the text. A show about the pointlessness of caring made an enormous number of people care enormously, which either disproves its philosophy or perfectly demonstrates its real one, and I lean toward the second. The clearest example is the Szechuan sauce. At the start of the 3rd season, Rick goes on a strange, fixated rant about a discontinued McDonald's dipping sauce, a limited promotional item from years earlier, and declares it his one true motivation, the thing his whole life's mission is secretly about. It was a joke, an absurd one, the point being the emptiness of building your life around a fast food condiment, and the fandom took it and ran straight past the joke into pure sincerity. There was enough noise that McDonald's actually brought the sauce back for a day, in October of 2017, as a promotion, and the demand so wildly outstripped the tiny supply that crowds gathered at restaurants and were turned away, and it became a genuine minor spectacle of frustration and longing over a packet of sauce. A gag about the meaninglessness of desire generated real crowds experiencing real desire, in the real world, over the exact object the show had chosen precisely because it was meaningless. You could not write a better demonstration of what the series is actually about if you tried. And then there's the joke the internet made at the fandom's expense, the endlessly repeated bit about how you have to have a very high intelligence to truly appreciate Rick and Morty. A piece of mockery aimed at a certain kind of fan who treated liking the show as proof of their own genius. And it stuck because it landed on something real, which is that the philosophy is really seductive to a particular frame of mind, the frame that wants permission to feel superior, that hears Rick say caring is for lesser people and thinks, yes, exactly, I too am too smart to care. That's the reading that misses everything, the one that takes Rick's nihilism at face value and adopts it as a personality. The one that doesn't notice the suicide attempt in the garage or the therapist in the office, or the fact that the whole series is a portrait of what that superiority costs. There's a real irony there that a story so carefully built to expose the emptiness of Rick's posture became, for some, a manual for adopting it. But here's what I actually take from all of it, and it's oddly hopeful. The show says nothing matters, and its own existence in the culture proves the opposite. Millions of people organized real feeling around it, argued about it, found their own griefs and questions reflected in it, waited years between seasons aching for more of a thing that was telling them, the whole time, that aching for things is foolish. And that ache, that devotion, That refusal to treat the show as meaningless, no matter how insistently it called itself meaningless, is exactly the behavior it secretly endorses through Morty and Summer and Beth, and even against his will, through Rick. The fans, by caring so much about a show about not caring, were living its real thesis rather than its stated one. They were being Morty, not Rick. They looked at a thing that told them it didn't matter, and they decided it mattered to them, and they were right. And that decision, that stubborn insistence on meaning in the face of a voice telling you there is none, is the entire point. The audience understood the show better by loving it than they ever could have by agreeing with it. So after all of them, after every character and every idea each one carries, what does the series itself actually believe? Because a story can put a dozen philosophies in a dozen mouths and still, underneath, be arguing for one of them. And I think Rick and Morty it's been arguing for the same thing from the first episode, and it isn't the thing on the surface. The surface is nihilism, and it wears it like a coat, and a lot of people never take the coat off. They watch Rick say nothing matters, they see the infinite universes flattening every choice into insignificance. They absorb the cosmic horror of it, the smallness, the meaninglessness, and they conclude the message is that life is pointless. But that's the mistake. And it's the same mistake the fandom makes and the same mistake Rick makes, which is to confuse the loudest voice in the room with the truth of the room. This is not a nihilist show. If it were nihilist, it would let Rick be right. It would let his detachment be wisdom, his cruelty be clarity, his isolation be freedom, and it never does. Every single time Rick's philosophy is tested against the actual events of his life, it fails him. The nihilism doesn't make him free, it makes him drink. It doesn't make him peaceful, it drives him to the garage floor. It doesn't protect him from loss, it just leaves him unable to properly grieve the losses he can't avoid. Nihilism is put on trial through Rick, over and over, and the verdict comes back the same every time. Guilty. It doesn't work. It has never worked. It is a wound calling itself a worldview. What the story actually believes is closer to absurdism, and the distinction is the whole thing, so let me draw it one more time as clearly as I can. The nihilist looks at a universe with no built-in meaning and concludes that therefore nothing is worth doing. The absurdist looks at the exact same silent universe, agrees completely that it hands us no meaning from above, and then concludes the opposite, that because meaning isn't given, it must be made. That the absence of a cosmic purpose is not a prison but an empty page, and that the honest and even joyful response is to keep living, keep loving, keep choosing, not in spite of the silence but right in the middle of it, fully aware, without illusions, and doing it anyway. The old image is a man condemned to roll a boulder up a hill forever, and the philosopher's scandalous conclusion is that we should imagine him happy because the struggle itself, chosen and owned, is enough to fill a life. This show has its own version of that man. It's a little robot at a breakfast table who exists to pass butter and knows it. And the question the whole series is really asking is whether that robot, whether Rick, whether any of us, can find a way to keep pushing the boulder without being crushed by the knowledge of how small it is. And its answer, delivered through everyone who isn't Rick, is yes. Morty finds it in the decision to keep caring after he's seen every reason not to. Summer finds it in loyalty to specific people without a scoreboard. Beth finds it, sort of, when she stops asking whether her life is the real one and just lives it. Even Jerry, in his small, blinkered way, has found a kind of peace that Rick's genius will never reach. The whole cast is a set of variations on the absurdist answer, each of them looking at the same abyss Rick looks at, and instead of building a fortress against it, building a life inside it. The meaning they make is not discovered in the world because it isn't there to discover, and the writing is ruthlessly honest about that. It's authored, it's chosen. It's an act of defiance, the specific human defiance of insisting that this person, this dinner, this ordinary Tuesday matters, precisely because you have decided it does, in a universe that offered no opinion either way. And I want to be honest that this is a harder position than the nihilism it's replacing, which is exactly why so few people land on it, and why the story keeps quietly rooting for the ones who do. The nihilist gets to stop. He gets to close the book, declare the game unwinnable, and excuse himself from the effort of caring. And there's a real relief in that, the relief of giving up, which is why it's so seductive and why Rick lives there. The absurdist gets no such relief. The absurdist has to keep making the meaning every day by hand with no guarantee it will hold, knowing the universe will never once confirm that the effort was worth it. It's not a feeling you arrive at and get to keep. It's a thing you do again in the morning and again the morning after that. A daily decision to treat your small life as though it counts, even though nothing outside you will ever agree. That's why the warmth goes to Morty and not to Rick, because Morty is doing the harder, humbler, braver thing, choosing meaning without proof, over and over, while the genius sits in the garage having decided the choosing is beneath him. The abyss is easy. It asks nothing of you. Everything worth having is on the other side of continuing to care anyway. And here's the line I keep landing on, the thing I think the show has been trying to say the whole time under all the jokes and all the blood and all the green portals. Nobody is going to hand you a meaning. The universe is genuinely silent, endless, indifferent, and the writing will not lie to you and pretend otherwise, which is exactly why you can trust it when it turns around and tells you the other half. Your meaning is yours to make. Your death is yours, your love is yours. The significance of your one small finite life among infinite copies is yours to assign. And no one, not a god, not a philosopher, not the smartest being in the universe, can assign it for you or take it away once you have. Rick knows the universe is empty and it destroyed him because he stopped there, at the emptiness, and mistook the first half of the truth for the whole of it. Everyone else knows the universe is empty too, and they went on to the second half, the part where the emptiness becomes permission, and they built something in it, small and mortal and chosen and real. That's the philosophy of every character in the end. They're all standing in front of the same abyss. The only question the show ever cared about is what each of them decided to do while they stood there. And the ones who are truly alive, the ones you'd actually want to be, are not the ones who understood the abyss best. They're the ones who, understanding it perfectly, turned around and loved somebody anyway. There's one relationship we've circled all night without ever looking at directly, and it's the one the whole thing is named after, the bond between Rick and Morty themselves, and I saved it for near the end because it's the hardest one to be honest about. On the surface, it's a grandfather and his grandson going on adventures, a warm old premise, the wise elder and the wide-eyed kid. And there's enough real tenderness between them that you can watch it that way if you want to. But a much colder reading is planted right underneath, deliberately, and once you know it, you can't fully unsee it, and the tension between the warm reading and the cold one is the actual engine of the pairing. The cold reading is this. It's established in the lore that a Morty is useful to a Rick for a specific and unsentimental reason. A Morty's mind gives off a kind of interference, a fog that camouflages the distinctive genius signature a Rick's brain broadcasts. Traveling with a Morty, in other words, makes a Rick harder to find, harder to track, harder to target. The grandson is, at the level of cold utility, a cloaking device. A Rick keeps a Morty close not only, and maybe not even primarily, out of love, but because the Morty hides him, shields him, lets him move through a dangerous multiverse without being detected by everyone who wants a Rick dead. And this is the wound at the center of evil Morty, the thing that radicalized him. The moment he understood that the whole Rick and Morty institution, all the adventures, all the bonding, might really be a system for using Mortys as human camouflage, an entire class of children kept close by an entire class of geniuses because the children make useful cover. The love on this reading is a story the Ricks tell to keep the cloaking devices compliant, and it refuses to fully deny it. That's what makes the relationship so unsettling and so rich. Our Rick has, at times, all but confirmed that he understands the utility, that he knows what a Morty is for in the cold sense, that some part of his attachment is, or once was, strategic. And yet, and here's where the cold reading is also refused a complete win, because our Rick, over and over, does things for his Morty that make no strategic sense at all, that endanger him, that cost him, that cannot be explained by camouflage. He grieves versions of Morty. He is wounded by Morty's anger in a way a man who saw the boy as pure equipment could never be. Whatever the relationship started as, whatever the cynical machinery underneath it, something real grew in the space, something neither of them fully chose or can fully admit. The cloaking device became a person to him, and the terrifying old man became, to the boy, something between a captor and a hero and the only one who ever really saw him. So which is it, love or use? And the honest answer, the mature one, is that it's both, permanently, irreducibly both, and that this might be true of far more relationships than we like to think. We come to people for reasons: need, utility, convenience, the ways they're good for us, the ways they shield us from the world. That's how a lot of bonds begin, in use, in mutual advantage, in one person being helpful to another. And the question is never whether use was there at the start, because it almost always was. The question is whether something else grew on top of it, whether the using turned over time and shared danger and accumulated history into something that would now survive the removal of the usefulness. Would Rick keep Morty if Morty stopped hiding him? In its better moments, the answer is yes, softly, without letting Rick admit it out loud, because Rick admitting it out loud would cost him the armor he can't live without. Would Morty stay with Rick if he could see the whole cold arithmetic of it laid bare? He does see it more and more as he grows, and he mostly stays, which tells you the bond outgrew its origins for him too. That's the deepest and most honest thing the title relationship has to say, and it applies far past the screen. The people who matter most to you were, quite possibly, useful to you first. That doesn't cheapen it. That's just where love often starts, in need, in the practical fact of two people being good for each other's survival. What matters, what the whole show is really watching for, is the moment the using slowly becomes loving, the moment you would keep the person even after they stopped being useful, the moment the camouflage becomes a grandson and the grandson becomes the reason. Rick and Morty never says out loud whether that moment arrived for them. It just keeps showing you the old man walking back into danger for the boy, again and again, for no reason the cold arithmetic can explain. And when the arithmetic can't explain it anymore, that's love. That's the only proof of it there ever is. There's a small, sad pattern worth naming before we close. And you only see it once you've met enough of the people from Rick's past, which is that Rick used to have a life full of others, and he lost every piece of it. Long before the show starts, in the days of the rebellion against the Federation, Rick ran with a whole band. Friends and comrades, people he fought beside and, we're given to understand, actually cared about. Birdperson was one. Squanchy was another, the wild party companion, the old warrior who used one nonsense word for half the things he meant, and still managed to say more real affection with it than Rick ever manages with a full vocabulary. There was a version of Rick, younger, who had a found family, a cause, people he'd chosen and who'd chosen him, and it's the closest thing to Happy the Show ever lets us glimpse in his history. And it's all gone. Birdperson was betrayed and killed and came back hollowed out. Squanchy scattered to the winds. The rebellion collapsed. Unity, later, looked at what he'd become and left him a note and walked away. Everyone Rick ever truly let inside the walls, he has lost one after another, whether to death or betrayal or their own good sense in getting clear of him. And I don't think that's incidental to who he is now. The Rick we follow, the cold one, the one who insists on needing no one, is a man standing in the wreckage of every relationship he ever actually had, and the coldness reads differently once you know that. It's not that he never learned to connect, it's that he did fully, and it was taken from him piece by piece until the safest looking option left was to stop connecting at all. The isolation isn't his nature, it's his scar tissue. And every old friend who wanders back into the show, every Birdperson, every Squanchy, every Unity, is a reminder of the warmer man he used to be, standing next to the frozen one he chose to become to stop the losing from hurting so much. It never stopped hurting, it just stopped showing. Before we drift off, I want to circle back to one figure we left half finished, because she completes an argument the story cares about more than almost any other, and that's Space Beth. When Beth was split, one version stayed home with the horses and the wine and the kids, and the other went out into the galaxy to live the enormous, dangerous, exceptional life that both of them had always secretly believed was their birthright. We already sat with the trick about which one is the original, so I won't reopen that. What I want to look at instead is what Space Beth actually found out there, because she is the one clean experiment in the thing Rick worships above all else: total freedom, unattached, exceptional, answerable to no one. She got it. Space. Beth is everything the Rick philosophy idolizes. She's a rebel hero, a warrior, roaming a galaxy she's not tied down to, free of the suburban gravity that the other Beth is still stuck in, free of the marriage, the mortgage, the small repeating days. She took the road Beth spent the whole series mourning she never got to take. And she's living it, and it is genuinely thrilling, and she is capable and strong and everything a person could want to be. And there is a quiet devastation buried in it. She keeps coming back. Space Beth, with all of infinity to roam and no obligation pulling her home, keeps returning to the ordinary house, to the family, to the very people the exceptional life was supposed to be an escape from. The freedom didn't cure the longing, it just relocated it. Out among the stars, unattached and heroic, she found the same ache the other Beth has at the kitchen table. The ache for these specific people, and the freedom she'd fantasized about her whole life turned out to be, on its own, another kind of empty room. That's the story closing the loop on its own central temptation. It spends years dangling the exceptional life in front of Beth. The unattached freedom, the escape from the small, ordinary existence, and it lets her finally have it, in full, through her other self. And then it shows you that having it changes almost nothing about the thing that was actually hurting. Because the ache was never really about being trapped in a small life. It was about the fear that the small life didn't matter. And no amount of galactic adventure answers that fear, it only distracts from it. The two Beths, the rooted one and the free one, converge on the same discovery from opposite ends, that the meaning they were both looking for was never a function of how big or small or free or bound their life was. It was a function of whether they'd let themselves belong to anyone. And both of them, in the end, choose to belong, choose the family, choose the specific over the infinite, which is the same choice everyone worth anything in this show eventually makes. Even the one who flew away came back for it, especially her. And that's all of them, or enough of them, the whole strange family and the creatures that drift through their lives, each one carrying a different piece of the same question. It's a curious thing, when you sit with it, that a cartoon about a drunk scientist and his nervous grandson turned into a strikingly philosophical story of its era, that people found their nihilism in it and their absurdism in it, and if they looked closely enough, their way back out of both. I think it lasted because it was honest in a way most comfort refuses to be. It never told you the universe cared about you because it didn't believe that and it wouldn't lie. But it also never let its cleverest character's despair be the last word because it didn't believe that either. It kept insisting, under all the jokes, that the emptiness and the meaning are not enemies, that you can know the first with total clarity and still choose the second, and that the choosing is the bravest thing a person ever does. There's something fitting about drifting off to a show like this, because its whole argument is that the small, ordinary moments are where the meaning actually lives, and there are few moments smaller or more ordinary or more quietly worth protecting than this one. You, warm, somewhere safe, letting the day finally set down its weight. Rick spent lifetimes and burned down civilizations chasing a peace that was, the whole time, available in exactly this: in stillness, in rest, in the willingness to stop running for a while and just be a small creature in a vast night and let that be enough. You've found it more easily than he ever could. That's not nothing. That might be the whole thing. So let the infinite universes keep spinning without you for a bit. Let the portals stay closed. Whatever roads you didn't take, whatever versions of you are out there living other lives, they can manage on their own tonight, and the one that counts, the only one you actually have to live, is the one lying here, breathing slow, finally quiet. That was always the answer the show was reaching for through all its chaos. That this ordinary life, this one yours, is the one you get to make mean something simply by deciding it does. You don't need a reason handed down from anywhere. You never did. You just need to close your eyes and let it be enough, and it is. And it will be there in the morning, and so will you. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.